This boy was reborn, flung 20 years into the future. In his past life, he was a living legend, a lone ninth circle mage. He sacrificed himself to save everyone. But 20 years later, he awakened in the body of a lowborn mage. Trapped at level 1, the world was no longer the same, but his knowledge, still monstrous. When Oscar examined his new body, he realized he had a good problem. He possessed an absurd amount of mana, which means that in this life, he can use that power to dominate the mages of the White Tower, in a world where only the strongest rule. Several people lie dead in one gruesome place. Among them is a man with a sword pierced through his chest. He tries to communicate with anyone still alive, desperately hoping to find a survivor. If they can't speak, he begs for any sound, any movement. He's practically pleading, but after several desperate attempts, he realizes he's the only one left. In the reflection of his eyes, he sees the severed head of the one who must have killed everyone. An enemy who united the demons for the first time, starting a massive war and bringing humanity to the brink of collapse. Not even the children were spared, but the mage began to chant an incantation in the ancient leprechaun tongue, and the child about to be devoured was saved. She was transported to another place, delivered safely into the hands of a woman. This long-haired man, the same one from the beginning, with the pierced chest, led the White Tower in battle. He risked everything he had to achieve victory and free humanity. If it weren't for them, that head wouldn't be lying on the ground now. To his surprise, a mysterious woman appeared to confirm the high priest's death. Her name, Edna, the final dragon, the perpetual observer of history, approaching the master of the White Tower. She told him she had good news and bad news. The master chose to hear the bad news first. As expected from the brutal battle, the White Tower was invaded by demons. Most of the mages were slaughtered, and their research was utterly incinerated. Utterly devastated, he still inquired about any good news. Edna reported that the Imperial forces arrived early, sparing some survivors and the master's disciples. Despite his wounds, he confessed it was a huge relief. Edna asked if he had any regrets about his decision. The master's answer was a resolute no. Every single one of those fighters was handpicked, and he couldn't bring himself to regret that choice. Not with their immense sacrifice. Realizing his remaining time was fleeting, Edna asked if he had anything else to impart. The master implored her to look after his disciples, since they were still so very young. Edna assured him she'd check on them. From time to time, the White Tower's master found her formality rather amusing, and the dragon asserted he was worthy of such treatment. She, and indeed the entire continent, would never forget the sacrifice of the White Tower's heroes. The master conceded, but revealed he harbored his own regrets. He confessed he hadn't been a good leader. Given another chance, he'd have lived selfishly, just for the sake of his own people. That's the kind of life he wished he could have lived. Just one more time. Then finally, life left his body. Edna solemnly noted the date and time of the great sage Oscar's passing. It was all carefully documented, along with the deaths of the other mages. Now, we're taken back to the White Tower, where a young boy seems to be recovering. A small leaf drifted onto his hand, and that was enough to jolt him awake. He awoke so abruptly that he ended up hitting the person who was there tending to him. Confused by his sudden reaction, the person stated they were just changing the patient's towels. They remarked that his sleeping habits were truly strange, and that he showed no gratitude at all, even while being cared for. The boy began to wonder if he had truly been asleep, especially in such a defenseless state. Placing a hand on his heart, he realized he shouldn't be alive. He was certain the demon high priest had pierced his heart with that very sword. Oscar immediately demanded to know what was happening, just as a door in his room violently shattered. Another young man seems intensely interested in the fact that Oscar has finally woken up. The nurse frantically attempts to stop this unruly young man, who looks ready to teach our protagonist some painful manners. And that surprises both of them. Oscar then asked how he was still alive. The blonde young man is equally taken aback. Analyzing his elaborate clothes, Oscar concludes he must be a powerful mage from the White Tower. Our boy still hasn't grasped the gravity of the situation. He boldly orders the mage to explain the current situation. which infuriates the blonde man. He's absolutely unwilling to explain anything to this boy, who has clearly lost his mind, since he should be reflecting and begging for mercy. Our protagonist senses the imminent attack and immediately thinks it's a demon infiltrator. He instantly conjures a wind shield, one strong enough to shatter bones. That's precisely what our boy expects to happen. But to his utter surprise, the shield slowly fades away. That's when he fully realizes the magic he now possesses is simply pathetic. However, the blonde man's demeanor changes completely. He actually praises the shield's structure, acknowledging that Oscar hadn't merely been wasting his time. The disciplinary action for his actions will now be postponed. It's time to focus on his own recovery. Frank, who had a front row seat to this entire spectacle, wonders if our boy has completely lost it. The personality of Maxim the Elder, who was just in the room, is quite explosive, but the protagonist is still trying to understand what exactly happened to his body. He asks what day it is. Frank replies that it's September 21st. Our protagonist believes he was unconscious for 5 long months, but Frank says it was only one day. Oscar tells him to contact Lloyd or Gilly, as he wants to hear what happened directly from them. Frank tells him to forget those traitors, and not to speak the Tower Master's name so casually. Apparently, he'd completely forgotten what happened. Lloyd totally ditched the tower. He went to become a disciple of the Red Tower. Gilly had apparently swiped some high-level scrolls. This accusation totally set off our protagonist, but then he quickly noticed something. The air around Frank seemed perfectly normal. He wasn't lying. Sasha is the Tower Master now. But to our protagonist, Sasha is just 5 years old. Yet he just learned Sasha is over 25. Frank, meanwhile, thinks our protagonist has a seriously vivid imagination. Finally, our boy decided to check his own reflection. And at first, he couldn't recognize the face staring back. He started touching his own face, perplexed, completely confused. Then after a moment, he finally realized that 20 whole years had passed since his death. The city had developed so much. The streets now had artificial lighting, and the vehicles looked incredibly interesting. All of this was possible thanks to magical engineering. His friends would have absolutely loved to see this. Back in his time, people had just given up on everything. But now, it's time for him to focus on the present and learn more about this brand new body. He came from a bankrupt noble family. He was taken in by the tower at age 10. He's a level 1 mage, but he's terrible at magic. At his age, he should be much better. That's why he must have felt immense pressure. So, he bought an illegal elixir, and after drinking it, he collapsed, which makes sense because if it had worked, his mana would have increased greatly. As he analyzed the body, Oscar realized he shouldn't have survived. That's when he noticed something truly interesting. He has far more mana than a level 1 mage. Most of it is still in its purest, unrefined form. It could be an effect of that illegal elixir. Then, in the middle of that bright glow, a small spot suddenly appeared. Our protagonist doesn't know what it could possibly be. And then, something dark and viscous dripped from his fingertips. Oscar was utterly frightened by it. When the viscous liquid hit the floor, he realized it might actually be poison, but he can't understand why it would be in his body until he finally put all the pieces together. Now he fully grasps the treacherous situation he's in. The supposed elixir was nothing but a perfect cover, a brilliant way to hide the fact he'd actually been poisoned. It was the poison, not the elixir, that truly killed him. If our protagonist hadn't been so exceptionally skilled, he never would have found the lingering traces of it in his body. Even without knowing who wants him dead, our protagonist is already fiercely determined. He's been granted an incredible second chance at life, a chance to fulfill the deepest wish from his past life. Now, it's his turn to live a more selfish life. And honestly, this isn't such a bad start. Oscar's decision is set in stone. He will avenge this body's original owner. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city of Syrian, a messenger brings vital news to a very important person. The imposing man, lounging in his armchair, insisted on being addressed as boss. And now, he demands to hear the latest news. Their shop was utterly decimated, destroyed from the inside, and a rogue mage is said to be responsible. That revelation sends the boss into a furious rage. Eyewitnesses claim he was specifically looking for the person who sold the elixir. The boss quickly put 2 and 2 together. It had to be Oscar. Oscar, who should have been on the verge of death. Fighting in that condition should have been impossible. That's when the henchmen started to worry that the powerful White Tower might investigate. But the boss countered, saying their client was a very important person. He even wore an official White Tower ring. Just then, both thugs suddenly jolted. A voice cut in, saying they were being far too obvious with their conversation. It's our protagonist, who has just arrived on the scene. He tracked them using the lingering essence still in the bottle, but he certainly didn't expect so many people to be involved. Quite upset, the gang leader demanded to know how this mere young man managed to destroy a shop. And our boy, cool as a cucumber, said he's very interested in the fascinating conversation they're having, practically demanding they continue this topic. Absolutely hating this petulant behavior, the gang leader roared, ordering his men to utterly finish off the protagonist. One of his henchmen charges right at him, swinging his sword with deadly intent. If they want to settle this with violence, our boy will do the same. He moves just one hand. He swiftly repels the attack with a wind technique. The same technique also cleanly slits the man's throat. His head now grimly decorates the room. Oscar hadn't expected only the head to be severed. The thug leader is utterly terrified by this, seething with pure rage. He aims a firearm directly at the boy, unloading several bullets at him. This is completely new territory for Oscar, but his wind shield renders the bullets harmless, since he detects no mana within them. He finds himself wondering how they even work. The mob boss gapes, astonished that the bullets were stopped, even without fully grasping their function. Oscar promptly returns the bullets to their owner, pummeling the thug with his own bullets. Now, with him wounded and on the ground, it's time he coughs up what he knows. A sound-blocking spell isolates the entire area. Oscar wishes the man would just cooperate a little and demands to know who wants him dead. The bandit defiantly states he won't talk, and for that, he's met with the protagonist's boot. Apparently, his pride is worth more than his life. Our boy is ready to finish this once and for all. He unleashes a spell directly on the bandit that profoundly affects his very being. That poor victim of society is rapidly going into shock. The wind invades his body, like thousands of razor-sharp needles. We're relentlessly piercing him from within. Oscar hates doing this to people. Since it's too noisy, he's just waiting for the truth. Tears now stream down his contorted face. The bandit finally vows to tell the truth. Casually sitting on the sofa, Oscar instructs him to reveal everything he knows regarding the elusive contractor. They receive the elixir and a lot of money for the job. At a rather cheap price to put on our protagonist's head. Oscar's next question is about the man's appearance. He wore a hood, completely obscuring his face, leaving them unable to see who he truly was. But he was conspicuously wearing the White Tower's ring. Our boy swiftly realizes the truth. The ring was simply a ruse to fool the bandit. Providing more details, the bandit states that the contractor carried a very distinct, peculiar scent. It was surprisingly refreshing like mint. Regarding what would happen after Oscar's supposed death, the bandit knows the magic tower is swamped with work, ever since it lost its prestigious spot among the 4 towers. An investigation simply wouldn't happen. This crucial bit of info made our boy uneasy, but the bandit knows far less about it than a mage from the White Tower would. Our boy claimed he'd forgotten a few things. After consuming that powerful elixir, the bandit offered to provide him with some documents. The poor guy had to practically drag himself to his desk, handing our protagonist everything crucial about the situation. Oscar immediately began poring over it. Even after defeating the sinister high priest, the White Tower's performance last year was absolutely catastrophic. It's been in a steady decline for the past 20 years, and now the imperial family is poised to make a monumental announcement. Oscar found this glaring lack of progress strange, especially since he'd given numerous documents to Edna, specifically to prevent this very outcome. Now he wants to know what the 4 main towers' current businesses actually are. The Yellow Tower controls lightning, granting them a massive advantage. In this age of magical engineering, they're responsible for street lighting. Meanwhile, the Blue Tower, focused on ensuring clean water, boosting agricultural and potion production significantly. The Red Tower is heavily militarized, dedicated to subjugating dangerous monsters. Now, it remains a mystery what the White Tower actually does. Oscar was utterly shocked to discover they make deliveries. That's simply absurd, considering they have mages who can fly. It's a colossal advantage for making incredibly fast and secure deliveries. Oscar wasn't even aware of these so-called wind knights. Mages of the White Tower who soar high in the sky, flying with unmatched freedom and courage, easily rivaling eagles and dragons. Our boy desperately wants to know who had the damnable idea to relegate them to deliveries. The bandit revealed it came from the current master. This left our protagonist utterly flustered and embarrassed, since Sasha used to be his very own disciple. Potions are the single biggest source of profit for any magic tower, so he wants to know why the blue tower has such an overwhelming advantage. He found out they practically hold a monopoly on the market. 20 years ago, that monopoly belonged to the White Tower. The bandit confessed. They sold clean water at exorbitant prices, even bringing rain to arid lands. Oscar wonders why anyone would buy clean water, believing it must be some rich extravagance for the wealthy elite. After all, clean water is so easy to find. This year's White Night Festival is their final chance to prove their worth. Only 7 months remain until that fateful day. Wounded by bullets, the bandit writhes in agony. He might not last much longer. Oscar ponders whether he should help him, especially after receiving such vital information. But then he sees notes detailing the man's past deeds. Arson, extortion, and even murder. This man is essentially a pile of trash. Oscar slips out through the window, leaving the bandit to his grim fate. Now outside, he wonders if he should really be a good person in this life. Upon returning to the White Tower, our protagonist feels utterly drained. He can't believe he got so exhausted from using such simple spells. In his current weakened state, he might not be able to wield the magic that made him one of history's greatest mages. Trying to perform the wind archive technique, it barely held together in his hands. Oscar needs to perfect this body. He begins with a magical analysis. Soon, he'll absorb more information about this body. His memories are a jumbled mess. And if he wants to save this body, he needs to know its history inside and out. He is the heir of Count Crucian and the sole survivor of a disastrous fire. Recognized as a genius from a very young age, great expectations were placed upon him. His grades were consistently the highest, and the presentation of his thesis cemented his reputation as an undeniable genius. Oscar still doesn't understand why he would now be at level 1. That's when he discovers he has mana deficiency syndrome. This revelation completely stunned our protagonist. But if this really is the truth, no wonder he's still stuck at level 1. He understands magic profoundly well, yet he can't even cast a single spell. The magical analysis was finally complete. Oscar is reviewing the results right now. This body has absolutely no deficiencies. This isn't a disease. Someone sabotaged the boy, just as the disease's name suggests. Its carrier is unable to accumulate magic. A mage can possess up to 20 mana circuits, which directly dictates their power level. Without them, it's impossible to get past level 3. But our protagonist's circumstances are very different. His circuits were intentionally tied by someone. If he was truly a genius, he would have known he didn't have that disease. It would be fantastic if he had a diary. According to Frank, the body's previous owner was an alcoholic, but that could have been a persona created on purpose because he already knew someone was trying to end his life. So he started acting like an out-of-control playboy. If this is correct, it makes perfect sense that he succumbed to the elixir's temptation. Even though he couldn't trust a soul, he had to risk breaking those chains. But our protagonist simply needs to untie this knot, something he's perfectly capable of doing. While sifting through some books, one of them caught Oscar's attention: the reinterpretation of basic magic. He started flipping through the book, coming across some fascinating notes. There were several comments about wind techniques, and the concepts in those words are very similar to our protagonist's technique. A technique not limited to just the defensive capability of the wind shield. The former Oscar also believed he should follow his own intuition. He also created several basic spells, even though he couldn't use them. He performed all those experiments as simulations, all in his own head. It makes sense that he's a genius. And that's not all. He hadn't abandoned his own studies and was working harder than anyone else. The content of that book is overwhelming for a beginner. He was keenly aware of the danger lurking around him, but he had to tackle everything entirely on his own. The Oscar of the past had to walk his path entirely alone, even as he carried the heavy weight of his own history. Our protagonist found himself utterly captivated by it all. The time has come to untangle the knot he previously couldn't, and given his incredible skill, Our protagonist is destined to achieve even greater things. Those who dared to clip Oscar's wings will now face the consequences of their actions. The next day, a gentle breeze swept through the square. Our protagonist can't even recall why he's wandering through this particular spot. All he remembers is drifting off to sleep after attempting to undo the magical knot that was impeding his magical growth. It was then that he heard someone call him master. Oscar saw a younger version of his former self. It's the dream curse. Every time he falls asleep, he's forced to relive his past. He never expected this curse to have pursued him into another life. It appears to be intricately bound to his very soul. But surprisingly, his students' dreams weren't corrupted. In fact, everything seemed incredibly peaceful. He's now teaching them about the different categories of magic, which include enchantment, acceleration, balance, or special types. Lloyd states that the White Tower strives for harmony, which is why wind magic is particularly suited for them. Sasha then asked if each magic tower had its own specific preference. Her teacher confirmed this, saying yes, as they all possess distinct characteristics. The Golden Tower, for instance, values speed and acceleration, while the Red Tower prefers enchantment and fire magic. The Blue and White Towers, however, lean towards balance. Gilead declared he wants to learn acceleration magic because he can't stand anything too slow. The teacher gently reminded him he can't simply choose. It's something you're born with. And now, he's about to demonstrate how it works. It was Sasha's turn to attempt casting the spell. But since this is her very first time, it's naturally going to take a moment. Then at the very tip of the child's finger, a subtle energy began to emerge. This energy isn't fast or dangerous at all. It's perfectly balanced. She's a true harmonic type, just like our protagonist himself. The child absolutely loved this discovery. The blonde boy followed suit. He found out he was an acceleration type. Now it was Lloyd's turn to give it a try. A small flower bloomed right on his finger, a clear sign he was a rare, special type. Our boy, however, was not thrilled by this. He immediately asked if he could change his type, but he was told it's an incredibly rare category. He really wanted to be just like his teacher. His teacher, flattered by such kind words, considered giving Lloyd even more lessons and researching a way to alter his type. Knowing he'd receive personalized private lessons made our boy absolutely ecstatic. Our protagonist explained that special type mages truly need a guide. Their path, after all, is incredibly difficult. Still, getting those lessons filled the boy with enthusiasm. They even made a solemn vow about it. That child's nickname eventually became Man of His Word. Even though he acted with great maturity, he was still just a child back in those days. Suddenly, a noise blared from a speaker. A broadcast was being shared across the facility. Someone was urgently calling for our protagonist. He didn't even know how long he'd been asleep, but he had to report to Laboratory 4202. After finally waking up, he made his way to the lab. There, he managed to unlock 12 of his circuits. He also obtained 2 crucial monolines, reaching level 2, knocking on the lab door. But he found the blonde professor waiting inside, who immediately wanted to know how he was doing now, especially since he'd lost a portion of his memory. Our boy confirmed he was fine, which put the professor at ease. Oscar finally remembered Maxim. He was once his junior, but now a seasoned veteran, one of the revered sages of that very place. He had always been honest and remarkably intelligent. Our boy had always hoped he'd have a bright future. When he was younger, he used to follow our boy everywhere and always respectfully called him master. Happy to know Maxim had truly succeeded in life, Oscar began to form a gentle smile. Then Maxim curiously asked why he was smiling. He then revealed something unsettling, that he'd heard about the recent death of some bandits. He directly asked if our boy had anything to say about it. Oscar stated he didn't know a thing, but he acknowledged there must be a compelling reason to happen. Considering they tried to kill him, he ingested a poison elixir and presented proof to back up his story. Maxim finally understood why our protagonist was plagued with health problems. Oscar claimed he tried to reason with them, only to suffer another assassination attempt. Staring at the hefty sum of money, Maxim realized those words rang true. Inside that notebook were notes detailing the assassination contract. Maxim declared he'd register everything as self-defense. Oscar was immensely grateful for this, but he seized the opportunity to ask for a favor. He wanted to meet the master of the Magic Tower, which shouldn't be too difficult, since Oscar apparently chats with the master frequently. Our protagonist didn't expect that at all. What's more, he can only meet her 6 months from now. For Oscar, this is absolutely terrible, as it'll be after the White Knight Festival. She's currently on a business trip, handling something incredibly important. Oscar questioned why she was so swamped, but he quickly understood why. One of the high mages is currently absent, which is quite an embarrassing situation. He apologized for his perceived rudeness, but couldn't help but ask what level the master of this tower had attained. He was informed that she had reached level 7. At her age, Oscar had already reached level 9. Knowing his student was incredibly talented, he thought she should be at least level 8. Maxim observed the cut on the body was remarkably clean and asked if the boy had been practicing attack magic again. Our protagonist merely replied that he trains from time to time. After hearing this, Maxim promptly dismissed the boy. Outside the office, someone else was already patiently waiting. This old man is the vice master of the establishment, and he came to intercede on behalf of our protagonist, asking Maxim not to be so harsh on him. This old man's name is Gandalf. Yes, I changed the name. Maxim insisted he needed to discipline the boy, but Gandalf was the one who brought this genius into their ranks, and is incredibly worried about him. Even though it's considered basic magic, it's incredibly difficult to perfect it to that level. Maxim quickly realized just how much the boy had trained. He truly is a whole box of surprises, and he's probably studying way more than Maxim ever imagined. Gandalf then announced they needed to meet with the other elders right away, who were already patiently waiting for them. Oscar headed straight to the 10th floor of the tower, the very place from his dream, now eerily empty, when a gardener suddenly found him. The gardener instantly recognized Oscar. This elderly gentleman, Wilter by name, was in charge of managing all the tower's facilities, and it was then he realized the rumors about Oscar losing his memory were absolutely true. They used to talk quite a lot, in fact. Our boy never imagined the news had spread so incredibly fast. He then asked why he was being treated with such politeness. The old man revealed he knew the former master, the great Lord Oscar. Another shocking revelation our protagonist never expected. That's why he's called Young Master. After absorbing this new information, our protagonist asked the elderly man to continue being his trusted conversation partner, but he replied that he would be leaving the tower soon. He'd been working there for an incredible 40 years. He had met 3 masters during that long period and countless colleagues by his side. He only stayed this long, however, because he had met the great Lord Oscar. He distinctly remembered his words at a ceremony, declaring that everyone in that tower was absolutely necessary. Our protagonist was genuinely moved by this heartfelt recognition, since he himself was the great Lord Oscar. Even so, the old man had decided to leave the place. This unexpected news left our protagonist completely surprised. The White Tower, it turns out, isn't doing so well these days. Its revenue is nowhere near what it used to be. Our protagonist then inquired if the old man was simply dissatisfied with his job, specifically regarding the service bonus. This was something that traditionally happened. After 20 and 40 years of collaboration, employees receive a prize of $200,000 after 40 years of loyal service. The current White Tower, however, can't afford this prize. And to avoid this huge embarrassment, the elderly man was leaving before his deadline. That place truly was his second home, and he thought of it with the utmost care. Our protagonist had no idea just how poorly the tower was doing. He thought other towers were just pulling absurd stunts, purely for profit. He definitely shouldn't have looked down on other people's work. In the face of dire need, all our boy has are titles, and those don't pay the bills. Thinking about this, he got so lost in thought that the old man had to call his name. He was worried, seeing how tightly our hero had clenched his fists. It was so intense, he'd actually ended up hurting himself. Oscar asked when he planned to leave, and the elderly man replied, in 2 weeks. He quickly bandaged him up and recommended the boy go to the infirmary. Oscar wants them to remain conversation friends. He told him he doesn't have to leave, because there's a way to solve everything, and he'll make sure it happens. He claims he knows a method to make a lot of money, so something like this never happens again. Now that our boy remembers what he said, he started thinking about how he could put into practice. He can only think of lectures and research, but the payment for those takes forever, and he's still just a level 2 mage. What he needs is a business that makes a lot of money. and the only viable option for that is the potion market. That's when our boy stumbled across an interesting note. What he found could completely change his situation. In the Vice Master's room, an argument is underway. The woman seems very agitated. She can't ignore this any longer. This is Fidelina, the one in charge of the finances. The Vice Master told her, the culprit is reflecting on what he's done. Fidelina argues that a thief is capable of worse. But the Vice Master told her, she doesn't need to worry about it anymore, since there's not much left to steal from this tower. Anyway, but she insists the boy be put in isolation. As punishment, Gandalf watches this, surprised, since those two are almost 100 years old, and he agrees with Maxim. Isolation is too harsh a punishment. It wouldn't serve the purpose of the punishment. He proposed the culprit reimburse the tower for 3 times the full extent of the damages. Adelina stressed the budget was far too tight. They needed to make a critical decision on this, and do it fast. So many facilities are already out of commission. If they sold materials from the potion room, they could snag 3 more months of budget. But Gandalf simply wouldn't permit it. This is a sacred place for research and study. These tools are absolutely necessary. They can't compromise the future, just to settle present bills. But Fidelina didn't believe there was a future in their current dismal situation. They've already waited 20 long years. And before she could continue her tirade, Maxim intervened. Even so, she kept going, insisting that even if a genius did exist out there, they certainly wouldn't choose their White Tower. As they hashed out this delicate topic, a knock sounded from outside the door. It was our boy, heading for the door, and he had a big suggestion to offer. He asked Gandalf if he could get a business going. Fidelina was instantly up in arms, since he's the very one who's overspent on research, completely ignoring her words. He revealed the article he'd unearthed. An entire province was quarantined due to an epidemic. Gandalf said the news was truly grim, especially if it was the infamous Cadena flu, as there's currently no known cure. Once upon a time, the tower had a vaccine, but the recipe was lost 2 decades ago. And with this in mind, Oscar wants to start his venture right here. He plans to sell vaccines for this affliction, a monopoly they once enjoyed, and it needs a comeback. Fidelina declared, it's not even worth hearing out the boy's crazy ideas. A ton of money has already been invested to recreate that vaccine with 0 results. And I deeply doubt a mere 20-year-old could pull off something like that. Our boy concedes he's only 20, but there's something unique about him. Compared to the rest, he's simply a genius. And there you have it. Our protagonist's aura absolutely dwarfed the old guard. She was absolutely seething. That much was clear. She unleashed a relentless barrage of comments, all focused on the boy's blatant petulance, and he was forced to endure it all in complete silence. Right in the midst of her furious tirade, Gandalf felt compelled to step in. That was a truly genuine investment suggestion, after all. And even if you're the one managing the finances, you're still being entirely too rude. After that blunt reality check, Adelina finally realized she had severely overstepped. Now our boy totally gets why she despises him so much, since she's the official treasurer, and for the past 2 agonizing years, he's been racking up some pretty massive losses. However, Oscar quickly asked them to reconsider his request. He then presented the article he'd brought along, asking Gandalf specifically to look at the second page. Archbishop Baldwin has suddenly changed his plans. Oscar stated this was extremely strange. Belonging to the esteemed Order of Eltra, there are only 7 archbishops in total. They're all supposed to be completely incorruptible, but in reality, that's simply not the case. When on a pilgrimage, they typically stay up to a month in the cities they visit, but only when they meet with nobles and merchants to extract money from them. Siren used to be a large city, though, but that's all in the past now, and Maxim agrees with that. But he believes the visit to this city was purely for religious reasons. Oscar countered that if that were truly the case, it's even more bizarre because the land there is cursed. The entire pilgrimage route has already been decided for them. And after Siren, they're heading to the city of Vents. In all the other cities, they stayed for at least a month in each. But Siren was the only exception. It seems this man is in a major hurry to reach Vents. During their travels, should an accident ever happen. They believe it's a curse directly from the goddess herself, and that completely ruins their campaigns to become cardinals. If Vince truly has the disease, the bishop is intentionally stalling for time, to spend as little time there as humanly possible. That's precisely how Oscar understood the situation. Fidelina praised the boy's sharp interpretation, but cautioned it was still just a theory. Gandalf also grasped the full implications of these words. But they can't sponsor our boy based on this alone. Or else, they'd simply lack the funds for all the other mages here. But then, he's willing to invest his own personal fortune into this. Fidelina, however, saw this strategy as incredibly risky. But Gandalf was absolutely adamant, and he offered a staggering 30,000 coins to our protagonist. The problem? That amount is nowhere near enough. Meanwhile, in the potion production room, our boy is running into even more trouble. It's time to put Plan B into full swing. He'll just make one critical sample and try to get sponsorship directly from the Archbishop, especially since the pandemic has put him in a tough spot. But snatching money from someone desperate is exactly the best thing to do. Oscar is fully geared up to put his master plan into motion. After a quick, focused burst of work, Oscar successfully completes his very first vial. Not a bad result. It's an energy drink. He just whipped it up for a little practice, confirming he still has that undeniable knack for potions. Nearby, Frank, who was struggling with heavy things, started loudly complaining about his aching back. But he did bring all the materials Oscar had asked for, and desperately asked if there was anything to drink, as he felt like he was on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. Oscar, noticing his utter exhaustion, handed him the recovery potion. It was incredibly good. Frank then asked if it had been made just recently, praising the magical mixture enthusiastically. Anyway, he always picked the freshest herbs for the process. Oscar commented that he clearly had a great eye for this, and should really be a merchant. Frank replied, he doesn't want to do that. After the White Tower finally goes spectacularly bankrupt. But he ended up getting a few well-deserved smacks from our protagonist, who simply couldn't stand to hear such blasphemy. Anyway, getting back to the main topic, he then asked what they should do next. Fidelina stated that he should definitely help our boy. Oscar then realized that, deep down, she also truly wants to help the tower. It's time to organize the ingredients. But he doesn't need just any assistant for that. The tower, however, has some rather problematic young people, and with the proper guidance, they could be a huge asset to this place. And one of these troublemakers is Frank himself. Our protagonist is incredibly curious about him. It's time to get to know him better. He actually noticed something while buying those herbs. They're all poisonous black lilies, carmelias, and devil's mushrooms. Oscar said they have medicinal value, and asked Frank if he knew how to prepare them. The young man replied, he needs to boil them for 12 hours. That part is correct. However, the nutrients are lost in the process. The best way to do it would be through steaming. That way, they could minimize the loss of these nutrients to an incredible 98%, just like the White Tower used to do in the past. Frank is very interested in this whole process, and Oscar said that it's easier to work this way. Now it's time to remove the toxins. Oscar does this with wind magic to drain everything out. A mist of poison is now in his hands, but the toxins still need to be isolated. He asked Frank to watch the process closely, which is now underway without the toxins. He just needs to mix each of the herbs in the proper proportions. Finally, the cure for the Cadena fever had been created. After 20 long years, the process seemed very easy. Now it was Frank's turn to try. Frank watched all this in surprise, as he can't even use 2 spells at the same time, and he's a bit anxious about it. Oscar observes everything. The boy's mana control isn't too bad, even if it lacks stability. However, he has reached the limit of his abilities. Oscar asked what was wrong, and Frank said he doesn't know how to use 2 spells at once. You need to be beyond level 4 for that, and he's only at level 3. But Oscar said he would teach him. Frank knows this is a secret technique, but our boy continued anyway. He said Frank should see it as a partition inside his own mind. On one side, use one technique, and on the other, use the second one. It's that simple. He has to give a shot now, with literally nothing left to lose. Amidst the swirling pink mist, a second mist mysteriously appeared. Oscar heartily congratulated his colleague, who had actually pulled it off on his very first try. If it was truly so easy, he then asked why this crucial technique technique had been kept hidden. Oscar explained that people were simply too greedy. They refused to teach it to novices for free, and that eventually became the entrenched tradition of this place. But during the war, that justification completely lost all its meaning. They desperately needed battle-ready mages. What they really needed now was to share knowledge, because these were truly times of desperate need. Just like during a war, Oscar told Frank he had done an absolutely excellent job, and that he was incredibly talented. He truly hadn't expected him to create that potion on his very first attempt, but that only happened because he had been taught exceptionally well. Since there was still a large quantity of ingredients left, and Frank was eager to keep working, and with their new, larger tools, Oscar suggested they do it all in one massive go. After a few grueling hours, Frank was completely exhausted. They had crafted 514 vials in total. Suddenly, Maxim interrupted their work, urgently announcing they were in deep trouble. The Blue Tower was currently in a meeting with the Archbishop, and they might already be too late. If the Blue Tower secured the contract first, it would create a massive problem. While the others worried, Oscar declared it wasn't over yet. That fever was officially classified as a B-level disaster. Knowing this, there was still something they could try. Maxim was utterly surprised by this sudden revelation. Fortunately, he could fly incredibly fast. Meanwhile, the Archbishop's guests were ready to meet with him. Baldwin permitted these individuals to enter. Mages from the Blue Tower were introducing themselves to him. Right at that moment, they were already taking their seats inside his opulent office. He wanted to know how the research for the fever cure was progressing, and it seemed everything was proceeding incredibly well. The Archbishop then inquired when it would finally be finished, and he was quickly informed they just needed to run the final tests. If they get positive results, they'll secure approval from the Empire's regulatory agency for full-scale commercial production. However, this test can't be completed in just a few days. They promised to finish everything within 6 months, an unacceptable deadline for the Archbishop. He needs to head to the city events within the next 4 months. The Archbishop's assistant then announced that more mages had arrived to see him. He let them in as well, assuming they were mages from the Blue Tower, but we confirmed they weren't, along with the people in his office. He grew curious about who they could possibly be. Our protagonist is making his grand entrance now. He introduces himself as a level 2 mage from the White Tower. Furthermore, he's there to make an irresistible offer. Baldwin was clearly surprised by the presence of a White Tower mage in his office. Oscar immediately got straight to the point. He stated he was there to sell the vaccine for the Caldina fever. Baldwin said the timing couldn't be more perfect, as the other mages were there for the exact same reason. Oscar asked, "Was I late?" The Archbishop replied, "No, because the Blue Tower hadn't finished yet." This was incredible news for our protagonist. The jealous blue mage immediately called Oscar a liar, claiming the White Tower had neither the money nor the technology to research a cure. But the Archbishop remained keenly interested, asking if Oscar truly had a cure for their problem. Oscar stated he would never lie to a man of the cloth. He then presented him with a sample of what he had produced. Intrigued, the Archbishop wanted to know how many vaccines he could produce. This made the jealous blue mage absolutely furious and outraged. The Archbishop sternly told him to stop shouting, since they were the ones who came to the meeting. Utterly unprepared, only then did the mage remember something critically important: bureaucracy. He asked if Oscar had the Empire's official approval for it. Our boy simply said no. So, the jealous blue mage seized the opportunity to declare that the White Tower had no advantage at all, nor the infrastructure to mass produce the vaccine. Oscar got furious when the jealous mage dared to belittle the White Tower's history. A monumental clash of egos was about to ignite, but Oscar quickly asserted that the White Tower boasted more history than them, being a full 5 years older. Though small, this difference was something the Blue Tower couldn't overcome in a millennium. And that was actually true. In fact, just 20 years prior, the White Tower held a complete monopoly on potions. The blue mage scoffed, calling it ancient history, something nobody remembered anymore. These words genuinely infuriated Oscar to his core, causing part of his dark aura to leak out, terrifying the Blue Tower mage. Oscar was absolutely ready to teach him a harsh lesson, but they were abruptly interrupted. The Archbishop's secretary announced there was an urgent call for him. from none other than the Lord of Vince City. To the Archbishop's utter surprise, the Lord had called to profusely thank him for his kindness, as he'd sent them the cure for that dreaded disease. The elders of the White Tower had secretly pulled it off, stating everything had been prepared in secret, and that the Lord should simply be thankful for this miracle. Pleased with the news, the Archbishop inquired if there were any side effects to the vaccine, but he soon learned it was absolutely incredible. Now the Lord wanted to know when a second vaccine shipment would arrive, since the White Tower's representative had stated the Archbishop would be the one to decide. So he said they'd send it as soon as it was ready. Then, into the call, the Archbishop then asked if this was Oscar's doing. The Blue Mage tried to interject, saying the boy had broken all regulations, but he was brutally silenced. Oscar declared he understood nothing about laws, much less about war. Only then did our boy remember. They were currently in peaceful times. Things had changed drastically. The weapon best used by demons was now disease. These took time to produce, and even longer to be approved by any regulatory agency. This brought about a brand new law, significantly accelerating treatment for war-wounded individuals, granting them special classification and care. The Blue Mage argued they weren't currently at war, but Oscar, recalling the law, calmly stated, there are 3 specific cases to consider here. First, conflict between species. Second, conflict between nations. And finally, when there's a Class B disaster or higher. This fever clearly falls into that last category, meaning no intervention from the regulatory agency is needed. The other mage from the Blue Tower piped up, declaring, if those useless fools from the White Tower can do it, then so can we. However, the Archbishop had already made his decision. It was all over. The moment he got that call from Vince, the Lord already believed they were collaborating, so there was no going back now. The Blue Tower Mage even offered to do it for cheaper, but that only made matters worse. The Archbishop refused to compromise his image over mere money. He ordered them to shut their mouths and then remove themselves from his sight. The Blue Mage stood up, visibly disappointed, vowing that Oscar would pay for what he'd done. Right before they left, Oscar then casually mentioned he'd already patented the vaccine. If the Blue Tower wanted to produce the cure too, they'd have to pay royalties to him. This infuriated the Blue Mage so much that his hemorrhoid actually burst. The other mage bid farewell to the Archbishop a bit more politely, and as he passed our protagonist, he left a lingering trail of an essence that smelled distinctively of mint and spearmint. This left Oscar quite thoughtful, and perhaps a little confused about his personal orientation. Now that they were finally alone, the Archbishop wanted to talk a bit more. It was time to discuss numbers. The Blue Tower had mentioned 2 million coins. Oscar said if those guys wanted 2, he could accept 5. The Archbishop was utterly shocked by this aggressive negotiation tactic. Just a few hours later, the news reached the White Tower. A check for 10 million had arrived in Fidelina's hands, leaving her practically speechless. Oscar was behind all, and he's getting showered with overwhelming praise and recognition for his incredible actions. Even Gandalf himself is utterly impressed, desperate to know what on earth transpired. The Archbishop wouldn't part with that kind of money easily. Oscar simply states there were some additional fees. The advertising fees, my God. Our protagonist is absolutely not messing around. An official announcement is set to be made by the White Tower declaring that the Archbishop had a divine revelation about the epidemic, which is why they miraculously created the vaccine in time. Since he's gunning to become the next cardinal, receiving a revelation directly from the goddess is incredibly helpful for achieving that lofty goal. That's precisely why he shelled out so much. Now the White Tower needs to ship out the vaccines. In just 1 week, Gandalf is absolutely flabbergasted by all this. The sheer amount is utterly absurd. Fidelina has already completely forgotten about the punishment she wanted to inflict upon our protagonist. Oscar announces he needs mages for this monumental task, specifically those above level 4. An announcement must be made throughout the tower, and Fidelina asks what she should even say. Gandalf tells her to invite mages of level 4, or higher, of course. They'll get paid handsomely and receive meat at every single meal. Within just a few hours, several candidates appear, incredibly interested in this incredibly tempting offer. Oscar tries to ask his seniors to pay attention, but he's immediately ignored by absolutely everyone. Our boy unleashes a powerful sound magic, that instantly begins to painfully bother everyone's ears. Now that he finally has their undivided attention, he states they urgently need to make the vaccines, and he'll need everyone's help to do it. But some of the senior mages aren't exactly inclined to listen to our protagonist. Oscar clearly wasn't expecting this kind of resistance. He asks Frank why they have such an issue with him, and the boy explains that our protagonist has done a lot of things in recent years. He's annoying, incredibly arrogant, and on top of all that, he's an alcoholic. A curious girl then steps forward with some questions. The vaccine's original production method was completely lost, and she wants to know how they're possibly going to make it. To the utter astonishment of all the onlookers, Oscar confidently declares he recovered the method himself. They immediately jumped to the conclusion that he'd wasted money, acquiring something completely untested. However, Oscar quickly assured them he'd already conducted extensive tests, and the White Tower already held a contract for it, realizing that leaking the recipe could be utterly catastrophic. Everyone grew incredibly wary and tense. So Oscar was blunt. He honestly didn't know why those students were still clinging to the White Tower. The girl clearly wasn't pleased with his attitude, declaring she'd wasted her precious time by even coming. She added that anyone with an ounce of common sense wouldn't stick around to hear his nonsense. However, Oscar calmly countered. He knew exactly what each of them had sacrificed just to remain here at the White Tower. He knew that Lena, a formidable level 5 mage, had been aggressively scouted by the Red Tower, and she'd rejected several lucrative offers. Apparently, our protagonist had meticulously read the files on every single one of these background characters, even a seemingly ordinary girl with glasses, who looked like she belonged in the B-list cast. He even openly admitted that he might not have possessed the sheer willpower to flat-out refuse the compelling offers they'd received. Yet, despite all that, no one had abandoned the White Tower. Lena suddenly grasped the truth. The elders knew the students were being scouted, but they had no other choice but to feign ignorance, to pretend nothing was happening, as they desperately didn't want to pressure their students. And right now, in this very moment, this was the darkest, most hostile winter the White Tower had ever endured. Even so, these mages chose to remain. That's precisely why Oscar decided to place his complete trust in them and finally share the secret recipe. If he couldn't share it with people this loyal, then he simply couldn't share it with anyone at all. But if they truly didn't want help, that was perfectly fine. He would completely understand. Our boy even dramatically sniffled, pretending to shed a tear. Now, it was time for the level 2 mages to finally get to work. Oscar donned his personal protective equipment with a flourish. Lena began to step closer to him, asking if she also needed to put on goggles, and the others suddenly seemed far more willing to lend a hand as well. Frank never imagined Oscar could be so incredibly convincing. He once even jokingly told his colleagues that the meat in their meals wasn't actually pork. That definitely got people talking. Anything but rat, and they were totally fine. However, things truly exploded. That when everyone learned it was beef, the vaccines were crafted to absolute perfection. They produced a whopping 140 over the required amount. A week later, Oscar strolled through the tower. He noticed delicate petals scattered on the ground. The old janitor must have been at it again. Looks like he's finally returned to work. After all the incredible positive changes, our boy was now engrossed in the newspaper. The pandemic had officially come to an end, and the Archbishop's image soared thanks to it all. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Frank happily approached, bearing exciting news. Orders for the vaccine were pouring in non-stop. Even the mighty empire had expressed interest. Oscar remarked, for those who don't want to die, that it's an obvious necessity, but he knew the demand would soon die down. After this current pandemic, the next one would take decades to reappear. Regardless, Oscar assured him that money wouldn't be an issue. He already had new potions lined up for production. Frank immediately assumed it would be something miraculous, but Oscar clarified they would be low-level potions. Frank then suggested the Star's Tear, a truly legendary potion from the White Tower. They say it can even resurrect the dead. Creating it now would cause a mountain of problems. They first needed to bolster the White Tower's strength. Since Frank was already there, Oscar asked him to procure more materials. It was time to get down to business. He asked for certain herbs, Siren's main export. But Oscar was shocked to learn that the fields, that where these herbs were cultivated, no longer existed, much to Frank's dismay. Oscar decided to visit the fields in person. He simply couldn't believe the news, and they couldn't even take a carriage, as the path was far too rough and treacherous. So they had to trek several more kilometers, to finally reach the place Oscar intended to visit. But Oscar was also taken aback by something else. He'd mentioned miles before, but now they were using an entirely different unit of length, the meter. This was something he'd have to get used to all over again. After trekking for a while, they stumbled upon a house. Frank knocked, hoping it was inhabited. A mysterious man answered, asking who these visitors were. He asked who these uninvited guests might be. Just as they began to introduce themselves, a few cars pulled up to the property. A seemingly wealthy man stepped out, eager to know if the current landowner was finally considering selling him the land. The landowner was an elderly man who definitely looked like he dabbled in steroids for recreational purposes, and he was absolutely not interested in selling his land, not one bit. Almost like a deal with the devil. The persistent buyer made a series of absurd offers, but the old man steadfastly refused to sell. His name is Ivan, and he's a dedicated herbalist. Pressing hard, the buyer warned that the land would lose even more of its value once factories started moving in. However, Ivan knew that as long as he remained there, those factories couldn't possibly be built. Realizing he wasn't getting anywhere, the buyer reluctantly decided to leave. But before departing, he acknowledged he'd accidentally trampled some herbs and decided to compensate for the damage he'd caused. He left behind a large, intimidating wad of cash. Ivan simply watched as the men drove off into the distance. But the buyer, eagle-eyed, noticed the visitors' distinct clothing. They must be mages, he thought, and he began wondering what they could possibly be doing out here. He soon discovered that the White Tower had amassed a fortune by selling their vaccines. This made the buyer absolutely furious with his driver for only telling him this crucial information now. With the White Tower's backing, it would be even harder to acquire that land. Willing to play dirty, he then asked if his driver still had contact with their mercenary connections. Now, he wanted to end the old man's life, have him officially listed as missing, so the land would then be put up for auction. It would undoubtedly look suspicious, but this buyer had the political backing to pull off. The real problem, however, was what might happen if the White Tower decided to directly intervene. However, the buyer still believed the White Tower was nothing more than a bankrupt, forgotten institution. And nothing more, really. Later that night, Frank gazed up at the stunning night sky. Ivan had kindly let them stay the night, since it was getting late, and the journey back on foot was quite long. Oscar agreed. Ivan truly seemed like a good person. He recalled their earlier discussion. This man was incredibly loyal to the White Tower because of all the past events. They also learned about the buyer's unsavory reputation. He was involved in shady, illegal dealings and was also quite violent and criminal. For 3 years, he'd been buying up land in that region, and some local herbalists had even gone missing. Ivan said he couldn't possibly be a target for that thug, and he hadn't sold his land because he was a great defender of the region's herbal culture. Because of his dedication, he had protection from the imperial family, which is exactly why he had resisted for so long. Oscar asked why he didn't just sell the land for an absurdly high price, and Ivan said the answer was clear. He loves this land deeply. It has been his home since he was born, and it will be until his last days. That's why Oscar wholeheartedly agreed Ivan was a good person. This place was far from the city, and the stars seemed to shine even more brightly here. Frank said he was envious of that peaceful lifestyle, which must be much more peaceful and pleasant. A genius like Oscar should understand his feelings even better. Our boy said that Frank was also quite promising, but Frank thought it was just empty praise. Oscar said that wasn't true at all, as he would never say such a thing. And having had access to the old Oscar's notes, he truly didn't understand why Frank was ever labeled as problematic. In the past, Oscar could easily see the stars, but now the city lights prevented it. Frank wanted to know if they could really revive the local herb industry, and our protagonist said it wouldn't be impossible, but they needed to talk to Ivan about it the next day. That's when our boy reacted with a sudden start. There was someone else there with them, 4 in total, and Frank started to get worried too. Oscar quickly understood that if Frank hadn't sensed their presence, these intruders were far from friendly. One of the thugs had already proposed, ending Ivan's life, but was quickly shut down. He knew the situation had shifted. The accompanying old man didn't even bat an eye. He just wanted his payment. The third man with them told them to quit their chattering. There could be a mage hiding here, so they needed to be extra careful. The youngest assassin prepared to breach the house, relying on his lock-picking prowess. He was sure Ivan was already fast asleep. He cautiously stepped inside and went directly to the bed, confident it would be an easy kill. That's when he saw something truly terrifying. He instantly bolted outside, pure terror in his eyes. But our protagonist had already unleashed a spell, piercing the extra skull as if it were nothing at all. Oscar understood. The wind bullet was an incredibly useful technique, conceived by the previous Oscar in his notes, drawing practical concepts from firearms. Oscar stepped outside, knowing he had to deal with 3 more, but he was surprised to see only 2 men left. An old man and a fiery redhead. When questioned about the third bandit, Oscar simply replied he put him to sleep permanently. The old man had half expected something like this to happen to that stubborn fool. The redhead demanded the herbalist's location, claiming he'd ignore his companion's fate. Oscar flat out refused, so the redhead warned of impending violence. He ordered the old man to strike, and he sprang into action with surprising vigor. However, our protagonist countered with his wind shield. With the attack repelled, it was Oscar's turn to strike. The old man was impressed by such agility, but he was already prepared to surprise our hero with a follow-up strike, revealing his spear could actually split apart, transforming into a truly versatile weapon. This way, the old man believes he'll finish him off for good. But our protagonist had already cast a spell. Out from the tip of his finger, Oscar declared this fight was utterly boring, flinging 2 small wind spheres toward the old man, who tried to defend himself from them. With one of his blades, he tried to parry that attack, seeing that the metal wasn't resilient enough to absorb the impact. The blade was destroyed. Oscar said that the weapon might be versatile, but still useless. But just then, he felt real danger, something visceral, and our boy immediately moved away from the old man. Someone just brought a firearm to the battle. A shot was fired, and the old man's skull was pierced. Our protagonist is still on high alert. The redhead had done that to his own companion. He said that if the protagonist hadn't moved away, he would have been pierced too. Oscar asked if they weren't allies, and the redhead explained that he was a subordinate. He could be replaced. This is why he hates criminals, as they have no scruples. Oscar wants to know what that toy is, and the redhead stated that it's too expensive to be just a toy. Our boy believes there are 3 spells on it: acceleration, strengthening, and penetration. This made the redhead much more serious. As our boy had figured it all out, Oscar said that must be it, since he wasn't able to block the attack. Despite being arrogant, the redhead acknowledged that he has talent. He even asked if he'd like to work with him, stating the pay would be very generous. But Oscar refused, since it would end with a big itch on his head. If you know what I mean with that, there was nothing left to discuss. Oscar had to seek shelter from his shots. The former master of the White Tower is cornered, with only half his mana available, and knowing that wind bullets are slower, he needs to think of something. The only window of opportunity is when the enemy reloads. The weapon, which can only fire twice, and takes a 1.5 seconds to reload. Amidst the plantation, the redhead is hot on our boy's trail. Seizing his chance to strike, Oscar charges forward, boosted by an acceleration spell. But the redhead spots him with alarming ease, even taking a moment to mock him. Dodging that shot seems utterly impossible, and his aim is crystal clear. But to the thug's utter shock, the bullet doesn't pierce the wind barrier. It just circles right around it. Now Oscar has his opening to strike, while the bandit frantically reloads his weapon. He's desperate to understand what just happened. Something happened to that shield. When he finally looks up again, Oscar already has his finger pointed right at him. Point-blank range in his final moments. The bandit desperately tried to comprehend how a low-level mage could pull off all that. Oscar simply states he never will, even if he were taught after finishing off his foe. That object quickly grabs Oscar's attention. A very troublesome artifact he recognizes. The word Trinity is etched onto its surface. It must be related to acceleration, strengthening, and penetration. A truly formidable weapon. Defeating it was no easy feat. Oscar used friction reduction on his shield, making the bullet simply circle around it, instead of piercing through. But if his theory had been wrong, his body would have been fatally pierced. Returning to the tower, he decides he needs to learn more about how to defend against threats like this. But for now, he needs to make sure Frank and Ivan are safe. After all, our boy had sensed the presence of 4 people. Deep in the middle of the forest, Frank is busy protecting the old man. He told Ivan to go ahead, as he would hold off the thug. He assured him that, for a novice mage, he's very strong, and would meet up with the old man soon. Ivan decides to take his advice, wishing Frank to be cautious. The bandit declares he's far too confident, and Frank asks why he didn't decide to chase after Ivan. However, the bandit is far more interested in this mage, his future victim, even though the old man was his actual target. He just had to know why anyone still respected the White Tower. That's why he decided to end Frank's life first, charging forward recklessly without a second thought. But Frank unleashed a wind slash to defend himself. The bandit not only dodged, but immediately struck back, scoffing, "Too easy." His blade was about to pierce Frank, as he challenged him to do something more fun. It was then, however, that the bandit realized something was gravely wrong. He didn't feel his sword cut through a thing. Something was amiss, and by the time he fully grasped it, his sword was already firmly gripped in Frank's hands. And his neck, well, his neck was far from intact anymore. The poor bastard was dying, drowning in his own blood. Frank was indeed struck by the sword, but he revealed he possesses a somewhat peculiar and truly unique physical constitution. Moments later, the thug's body plummeted to the ground, lifeless. Our protagonist, hidden behind a tree, had witnessed the whole thing and realized that Frank wasn't just a special type of mage. He also managed to turn his body into wind. To counter this ability, only energy blades or powerful magic would be effective. Our protagonist had only ever seen something like this, described in ancient books, particularly about one of the former masters of the White Tower. Upon appearing in the clearing, Oscar completely startled our protagonist. Frank asked when our boy had arrived, and Oscar admitted he had been worried, but complimented Frank on easily defeating the thug. Now, they needed to know where Ivan had disappeared to. Frank immediately started yelling for him, and our protagonist grimly realized that the processor in Frank's head might just be a core duo, which wasn't exactly top tier. It might even be a Pentium. Sensing the old man's energy, Oscar pointed them in the right direction. At dawn the next day, Ivan profusely thanked them for their help. He swore that if it weren't for these young men, he wouldn't be alive. Frank humbly stated he didn't do much. However, our protagonist made a point of saying he actually let one of the thugs get away, and Frank was absolutely vital for the old man's survival. This whole ordeal left Frank deeply mortified. Now, everything seems to be resolved, or so they think. That darn buyer won't back down. Ivan declared this land the absolute best in Siren, and its location is simply flawless. However, over the past 8 years, the land's productivity has significantly plummeted, a direct consequence of magical engineering's progress, which is currently poisoning the waters. This could become a permanent issue for land exploration and for cultivating precious herbs. Oscar has a crucial question for this elder. He inquired if the old man's loyalty is connected to the 4th master of the White Tower, Eyes, and the old man confirmed it. Back then, herbalists were viewed very differently. They were often branded as warlocks, forced to live hidden from others, leading a constant nomadic existence, until a true savior emerged to aid them. A brilliant man renowned for his revolutionary ideas, Reynold Eyes, who invited them to settle in that very city so they could finally find peace and respite. Not even Ivan knew such intricate details of his history. Our boy revealed he learned it all from a book, but one that only Tower Masters are supposed to access. He conveniently forgot to mention that part. That's precisely why herbalists gathered in that city. For the first time, these nomads had land and true comfort. The White Tower bestowed all of this upon his ancestors, so he'd never cease to be grateful. Oscar graciously thanked the man for his unwavering efforts. He affirmed that the White Tower would still stand by him, but due to recent events, the imperial family wouldn't remain silent regarding this brazen attack. The only problem is that bureaucracy moves at a snail's pace. However, Oscar guaranteed that this time they'd act with lightning speed. He's signing a contract with them that very day, all about the Caldina fever vaccine. Meanwhile, in that blasted buyer's office, there's a desperate scramble. They need to flee immediately. Things have escalated into an incredibly dire situation. But that's just not going to happen, because armed men have arrived to deliver some swift justice. The superintendent of the Empire's internal affairs. He came personally to nab that thug The accusations against him are piling up. He's definitely leaving this place in handcuffs. If he dares to resist arrest, with any luck, he won't be leaving here at all. The bandit tries to claim his innocence, but that's a decision for the judge to make. Sweating bullets, the thug suddenly realizes he needs to contact his superior to escape this mess. So he asks if he can smoke one last cigarette, but the superintendent immediately orders his men to cuff him. No time to waste here. The bandit protests, claiming this is a mistake, and asks if they even know who protects him. But the superintendent simply shrugs off the threat. After all, he's under the emperor's direct orders to resolve this. As the bandits are being hauled away, one of the men asks the superintendent a burning question. Who exactly is that guy? They acted so fast. He must be someone incredibly important. They must have received an order from way above. It seems the emperor truly favors the White Tower. But even the superintendent can't quite grasp why. He knows of the place's heroic past, but that was ages ago. And the present is unfolding very differently. Looking up at the sky, the superintendent then tells his subordinate that it all began 20 long years ago. He was just 12 back then, when humanity finally triumphed over the demons. And in those glory days, the White Tower was a completely different institution. The older generation still remembers that time, the glory of the past. But now they must move. There's still important work to be done. They're heading east to locate the factories, polluting the region's vital water sources, something the superintendent is undertaking, entirely on his own initiative. And now, his thoughts drift to Oscar and Frank, the white mages who handled everything flawlessly and swiftly dismantled a dangerous gang. The subordinate asks if they can grab a bite first, but the superintendent tells him they'll eat later. Back at the White Tower, Frank breathes a sigh of relief. And Oscar prepares to report everything to his superiors. But before they can head inside, they are intercepted by Gandalf. Frank quickly tried to conjure an excuse, claiming he had something urgent to attend to. Gandalf found the young man's abrupt exit quite odd, and Oscar simply explained Frank had personal business. Cutting straight to the chase, Gandalf revealed Oscar had just handled something massive. He wanted the full report in his office, precisely where Oscar was already headed. Once inside, Oscar noticed the old man seemed somewhat downcast, as if something unfortunate had transpired. Gandalf asked if Oscar had heard anything from Frank. Oscar replied no, asking if something was amiss. It appears the formidable Sirius family plans to take the young man away. Our protagonist urgently wanted to know if Frank had actually agreed to this, but Gandalf wasn't entirely certain. Apparently, the negotiations regarding the matter were already completely finalized, and he knew none of the specific details. Frank was already packing his belongings in his room when he heard a knock at the door. It was none other than our protagonist, who already knew exactly what was unfolding. Frank, the youngest son of a prominent merchant family in the Empire, must return to their company and marry to uphold their tradition. By all indications, this was an arranged marriage. Frank knows the girl is a good person. Our protagonist asked if Frank actually agreed to this. The boy said that even without knowing her, his future wife must be a good person. But Oscar wasn't just talking about the marriage. He asked if abandoning magic was truly the right path for him. Frank looked deeply saddened by this, believing he possessed no real talent, which is precisely why he was giving up. The boy had once thought he was special, so he went to the White Tower, a place with fewer prodigies, hoping he might finally stand out there. But he soon discovered the harsh reality of his situation. As he was venting, Oscar suddenly told his friend to listen. Frank thought he was about to be scolded for his words, but was stunned to hear he was actually very talented. This seemed to visibly shift Frank's focus. But even happy with the compliment, Frank still wasn't considering staying. Just then, his older brother arrived. He quickly assumed our protagonist was a friend, but sternly told them they had 5 minutes to leave. But before he could leave, our protagonist then asked the man for a price. To be precise, he wanted to know the price of Francis's stay at the tower. The man demanded to know who our protagonist was. To make such a bold proposal, Oscar confirmed he was a friend, and the one responsible for creating the vaccine. Gronk then introduced himself. He revealed he was that fool's brother and the eldest son of the family. Ignoring Frank, our protagonist made his proposal. Gronk started to think he was an idiot. A mere child wanted to negotiate with them, but our protagonist guaranteed there'd be no losses for either side. In just 2 years, Frank would be one of the best mages there, and in the long run, it would also be incredibly beneficial for his family. Gronk was intrigued by the proposal and asked what would happen if they failed. Oscar offered the profits from the vaccine for the next 50 years, guaranteeing that the tower's vice master would personally witness the contract. So Gronk asked if he was going this far because his brother was truly worth something, or if he was doing it purely out of friendship. Our protagonist said the answer was obvious. The boy was truly valuable. He wants to restore the White Tower's reputation. And for that to happen, Frank is a key piece. Gronk said the boy was very young, but as a merchant, he couldn't ignore the other party's naivety, and so he decided to add a condition, because Oscar had forgotten something fundamental. Merchants value trust above money, and the protagonist needed to prove his worth. He has a level 5 knight as a guard. The next day, Oscar would have to prove his skills in battle. Only then would he agree, since our protagonist is a level 2 mage. The knight wouldn't use energy in his sword. Oscar realized they didn't want to give up the marriage, a sign that the other family must also be influential. As he left, Gronk said they would see each other again at noon. If our hero didn't show up, it meant he had given up, leaving Frank desperate, terrified about what might happen to his friend. All of this was happening because his older brother was absolutely enraged and desperate to humiliate our protagonist. Frank suggested a peaceful resolution, but our protagonist was absolutely unyielding. He declared a level 4 mage could win. Frank was utterly speechless. He simply couldn't believe our protagonist planned to reach that level in a single day. However, a mage already stable at level 3 could advance to the next level with effort, and the actual condition wasn't to win, it was to simply prove his skills, something our protagonist was confident he could do, because his strategy, it turned out, was far more interesting than a simple win. The level 4 mage who would show for the battle was Frank himself, waiting in the training room. Frank was uneasy. He'd tried this for so long and still hadn't managed to succeed. Our protagonist urged him to trust him, to just relax and start circulating mana through his magical circuits. As our protagonist watched his concentration, our protagonist deemed it satisfactory. However, he then made several key observations about specific areas where he was losing energy within his mana circulation. Frank asked if all geniuses could truly see that. Our protagonist said Frank was the only one surprised. Frank asked if correcting it would make him level up, but our protagonist replied it was irrelevant, since most mages tend to ignore such things. However, it's something archmages never ignore, and from then on, Frank would practice it every morning. Our protagonist then began a long, detailed theoretical explanation of what was needed. Frank had to pay close attention to all those details to keep evolving his magic. Now, it was time to address another matter that had occurred previously. The magic Frank had used during their battle. In the Herb Garden, Frank apologizing. Frank said he simply couldn't do it, making it very clear. It wasn't from a lack of trust in our protagonist, but he was absolutely terrified. The last time he tried that technique, he almost died. He grew more anxious with age, burdened by his family's grand expectations. So, he decided to master what others couldn't. He tried not to limit his magic to just one part of his body. If he were made of wind, he'd be incredibly powerful, a thought that proved utterly reckless. Initially, he thought it had worked, but then he panicked, unable to stop the reaction. Half of his body transformed into pure wind, and his mana spiraled wildly out of control. Frank panicked, desperately calling for help. If he hadn't received immediate aid, he certainly would have perished. Back then, he was utterly helpless on his own, and he still remembers that terrifying feeling, something he vows never to experience again. However, our protagonist pointed out that he actually used the technique very well. Frank explained that it activates naturally in dangerous situations, which he found pretty pathetic. But our protagonist didn't see it that way at all. Mages face all sorts of problems, and the solution to this one is surprisingly simple. Frank needs to learn to control his mana even better. The problem is that depends on talent, and he doesn't know how to get around that limitation. Oscar confirmed there was a way to perfect this skill as he began drawing a summoning circle on the floor. Frank nervously asked if he was going to make a contract with a demon. Our boy stated that no demon would appear, even if they were explicitly called. What he was going to summon now was a spirit, a wind spirit to place inside Frank's body, determined to help him improve. Frank made a grand, passionate oath to the wind spirit, but so far, absolutely nothing happened. His affinity with spirits was just too low. Frank claimed he felt a slight breeze, but the protagonist assured him it was just his own disappointed sigh. However, he shouldn't get discouraged. Few humans naturally have an affinity with spirits. Frank despaired once again, since this was supposedly his only way to better control his mana. But our protagonist revealed there was another method, a spirit summoning technique he learned in his past life. Amidst the company of the elves, it was now our protagonist's turn to try. He was certain the Spirit King would remember him. In the past, he hadn't done this in a training room, but in front of the world tree itself. With just a few words, Oscar asked the wind spirit to come to him. A strong gust of wind swept through the place. He actually succeeded on his very first try, and a spirit appeared before him, asking if that human had summoned it. The first time in 27 years, Oscar said he wanted to make a contract and asked if the spirit needed anything. The spirit assured him that no formalities were needed, but it asked if he wanted to form a friendship connection with the high spirit, Celestin. Our protagonist said no. This left everyone completely surprised. Only then did he remember. He should have started with that part. Actually, the one who truly needed a spirit was a boy, who was also there. The time for the duel had come. Everyone was already gathered. Gandalf was there too, acknowledging that the vaccine's inventor was indeed very stubborn. Grant's knight was introduced. He was truly at level 5. The battle would be simple. Whoever took the other's necklace would be the winner. If there was no victor in 5 minutes, Grant would accept defeat. Oscar liked those rules and was eager to start. They asked if it was okay for him to fight in those clothes, to which our protagonist said yes, since he wasn't going to be the one fighting. Frank finally presented himself to them. This left his brother completely speechless, unable to understand what was happening. Oscar remembered the terms of the bet. He needed to show his skill, and he had masterfully taught Frank the day before. Grinch was furious about this, assuming that by putting his brother forward, his knight would go easy on him. But the protagonist disagreed, believing a level 4 mage had a better chance of winning. Grinch was taken aback. He couldn't believe his brother was level 3 just yesterday. However, for Frank to become an elite mage in 2 years, our protagonist had to prove his unconventional methods. Grant told his knight not to hold back, and our protagonist told Frank not to be afraid. He just needed to follow his training. The young boy tried to summon his courage, now completely determined to claim victory. The knight greeted the young master with polite reverence. Finally, the match was declared to have begun. Frank immediately began creating distance, moving swiftly away from the knight. This was all part of their carefully planned strategy. That's when the boy felt a surge of threatening energy, and it was hurtling directly at him in the form of a dangerously sharp sword. The absurd pressure proved his enemy was truly level 5. Even without actively using his energy, he was still utterly intimidating. Frank was almost paralyzed with terror. But slowly, he started to recall the previous day and the protagonist's inspiring words. Oscar, too, was proving to be an excellent friend, enough to make Frank even braver now. He managed to produce a formidable blade of wind in the heat of battle. It was time to seize this victory. This was the very first time in his life he'd heard someone say they truly needed him. As he launched his attack, Frank absolutely refused to disappoint our protagonist. The knight defended with effortless grace, but noticed the young master had undeniably grown stronger. He could even weave 2 spells at once, but perhaps even that wouldn't be enough. The knight decided he had observed quite enough. It was time to go on the decisive offensive. Frank was already completely cornered. Blocking that incoming attack would be utterly impossible. Even so, he unleashed the wind blade one more time. Grant watched the fierce fight from the sidelines, utterly curious how his brother had progressed so dramatically in a single day. He asked the protagonist if he had employed some forbidden technique, but our boy assured him the method was perfectly safe, that he had absolutely no need to worry. However, Frank's astonishing growth was clear to everyone intently watching the fight, but the knight remained utterly determined to win. Since Frank wasn't a battle mage, a bureaucratic job would suit him much better. Under pressure, the knight was about to snatch the necklace from his neck. Grant was certain he had won, and our protagonist declared the battle over. This left the young man incredibly intrigued, unable to grasp why the protagonist had suddenly started smiling. Last night, they trained hard, and the mastery of wind was perfected. However, Frank was still traumatized, unable to easily turn his body into wind. But it was still possible to use the spirit's power. Oscar was about to explain something truly interesting. The details of their contract, the part where he could wield a great, unifying power, capable of turning anything that touched his body into wind. He had to hide this until the very end of the battle, to utterly surprise his opponent. The knight didn't even have time to notice. But something incredible had happened right before his eyes. Frank was in possession of the necklace, and a hard-won victory as well. Not even Frank himself could believe what had just happened. But after a moment, he started celebrating like a giddy child. Grank knew that technique was the wind god, something his brother shouldn't be able to use ever again. Gandalf declared the match was over, and asked if Grant agreed with the results. But the young man was utterly surprised, as our protagonist had taught his brother, for only a single day, enough to make him achieve an entirely new level of power. So, he decided to acknowledge his defeat. Gandalf remarked it had been a long journey, and a shame the young man had to leave so soon. However, Grank asked them to take care of his younger brother, acknowledging that he had matured a little more. Since Frank didn't understand it was a compliment, he asked his brother to repeat it, but Grank had already lost his patience, so he decided to leave. Oscar found what his friend did absolutely hilarious. Frank had done it on purpose, pretending he hadn't heard the compliment. But the very next day, he was confronted with a harsh reality. He would have to go through that door, except it didn't look like a training room at all. That dark energy, it felt like it was pouring from a prison. Our protagonist confirmed it was once a prison, but that was centuries ago. Frank insisted he'd done nothing wrong, demanding to know why he had to train in isolation. But this was a direct order from Gandalf himself, who already held incredibly high expectations for the boy. Frank was crushed. He hadn't even had a chance to rest. It was up to him to seize this time, to perfectly hone his techniques. Our protagonist internally resolved that he could do it, but the poor guy was utterly heartbroken. As he closed the door, our protagonist mentally apologized, since he was the one who had requested that training. 30 long days of isolated training. Oscar stated it was absolutely vital, knowing full well it would be incredibly difficult to endure. The old man acknowledged they needed to take extra good care of the boy. Upon his return, what's more, the young man's family company was generously sharing its distribution route, completely free of charge. Oscar quickly realized that Grant was a true visionary. The success of the White Tower could bring them incredible prosperity, which certainly wasn't bad for anyone. That was truly excellent news. The old man also had something else to ask our protagonist. He asked if he'd be willing to give a lecture. Oscar was completely caught off guard by this. He acknowledged that he was capable of doing something like that. However, he was supposed to be more focused on the potions department. Intrigued, our boy asked Gandalf if there was a specific reason for this request. The old man noticed our protagonist picked up on things with remarkable ease. He asked if he'd ever heard of the Night of Mages, a day when mages from each tower gather to showcase their skills and growth. It was created by the Emperor so they could grow closer. But in practice, they just fight every single time. It should have been canceled a long time ago. Oscar wondered why the old man was bringing this up now. The full details will be announced by the Imperial family in the new year, and Gandalf's real fear, it was the Black Tower. Given their ambition to be among the top 4, the White Tower could face an attack, so extreme caution was paramount. This alone was more than enough to ignite a fiery determination in our protagonist. Channeling a JoJo character, he declared he'd get it done. Walking through the halls, Oscar fumed, enraged by the Black Tower's arrogance, daring to even attempt such a thing. Still, Frank had reached level 4, and this was all thanks to the spirit, who remembered our protagonist. It was keeping its promise. Honestly, that spirit detested being summoned by one mage, only to then make a contract with another. Oscar summoned the spirit one more time to deliver a message. Tell Salafrian of the Silence that the White Mage has returned. At first, the Wind Spirit was absolutely furious because our protagonist dared to utter the Spirit King's name. However, what truly surprised it was the true identity of this audacious human. causing the Spirit King himself to issue a command. Oscar then declared he wouldn't spoil the fun by revealing who it was. He then learned that Salafrian had already given his full approval. It wouldn't be a contract, just a transplant. And that's more than enough for our boy. He also has a crucial message to hear. A powerful reminder of an old promise he made. A promise our protagonist absolutely intends to keep. He couldn't fulfill it in his past life because he tragically ended up dying. His much-anticipated lecture was then announced. A radical reinterpretation of the basics of magic. But before fulfilling his promise, our boy needs to take care of that family too. Meanwhile, the red-haired boy was walking by and quickly recognized some of his classmates. While waiting for the lecture to begin, he asked if it was exclusively for level 3 students, since he hadn't seen anyone of a higher level around. A girl mentioned she thought the tower was improving, especially since Gandalf himself encouraged this initiative. It's even in the same place where the Imperial Observation Seminar was held. The lecturer must be someone incredibly impressive. Overhearing their conversation, someone sharply told them to stop joking around. You're making far too big a deal over something so ridiculously simple. He then introduced himself as Damien, son of Count Proud. The girl, Rosa, chided him for being too negative. The tower was finally making a new investment, and they were sure the lecturer had to be qualified. But among all the students present, only one low-level mage was conspicuously absent. Their conversation was immediately cut short. Someone had magically blocked all sound in the room. None of the students could utter a single word. Our protagonist declared, "It's a pleasure to meet you all. From now on, I will be the one to present to you the reinterpretation of the very basics of magic." Naturally, all the mages were utterly dumbfounded, since our boy was only a level 2 mage. Still, you could clearly see the displeasure on all their faces. Oscar announced that anyone with a complaint could simply leave. Right now, they weren't just students subject to a professor's control. However, there was one catch, one crucial condition. They had to prove they were skilled enough not to need his lesson. The time limit was a mere 10 minutes, and within that time, they had to declare that they didn't want to stay for the class. Something supposedly very simple to execute. The students were absolutely outraged. It wasn't simple at all because of the powerful sound-blocking magic. But they soon realized it was all a clever test. Since the lecturer was only level 2, it had to be solvable somehow. This was his way of saying that if they couldn't manage it, they had to stay and listen to his lecture. Oscar was eager to witness their abilities. He had intentionally left a few subtle openings in the spell, but that didn't mean it would be easy by any means. Only a few minutes remained, and no one had managed to do anything yet, until a boy suddenly stood up, a cheerful grin on his face. Damien believed he had succeeded. Our protagonist, knowing he was a mere beginner, decided to congratulate him. The boy proudly said it was easier than he had imagined. Then everyone heard a sudden, loud noise, signaling the abrupt end of the 10 minutes. Damien was the only one who had overcome the challenge. And just as promised, the choice to stay or go was entirely his. In truth, Oscar was burning with curiosity. Leaving would offer sweet relief. But the challenge had utterly captivated him. Having perfectly guessed the boy's thoughts, Oscar decided to bestow a reward. He'd teach him a spell, a special bonus. He asked which basic spell Damien liked best. Damien responded that he preferred Windblade. Oscar then asked him to demonstrate it. The boy complied, and after his demonstration, he asked if that was sufficient. Oscar admitted it was quite impressive, but he was about to teach him Windblade. Damien questioned if our protagonist couldn't see what he'd just accomplished. Oscar simply replied that it simply didn't meet his high standards. Grasping the blade with his bare hands, he declared it had 2 serious flaws. First, this spell isn't actually made of wind, and with that, he effortlessly crushed the blade. Oscar asked if the boy truly knew what wind was. He explained that wind only exists through the movement of air. Therefore, the technique Damien performed wasn't a wind blade. All students should heed this crucial lesson. The magic of the White Tower demands constant flow. Otherwise, it will simply be destroyed, just as he just demonstrated. Now, for the second problem, Damien, you poured far too much mana into that spell. You could have been much more efficient. Our boy paused for a moment before continuing. He considered Damien's background, imagining he grew up watching successful mages in his family, trying to copy them from a young age. But executing such magic isn't easy. So he compensated by using more mana than necessary. A bad habit he still had. Damien was astonished because that assessment was absolutely spot on. Now that you understand these issues, you can refine this technique to be even better. But it's truly a shame. The student won't be staying for the actual class. That single example instantly convinced Damien and chose to stay and learn more. A result our protagonist had already foreseen. 3 weeks later, rumors began to swirl. People were buzzing that our protagonist was a truly talented instructor, but they thought he was only good for beginners. Even though, surprisingly, some level 4 mages were attending his classes. The mages discussing this even considered going themselves. A long-haired girl listened to their conversation intently. If they don't leave now, they won't be able to get in. The first guy stood up, and then everyone else followed suit, having overheard the conversation. The beginner mages were utterly surprised. There were many more students than usual. Even Maxim decided to show up. Our protagonist entered the hall, greeting everyone with a good morning. Today, we're going to learn a very important spell. The class was filled with buzzing enthusiasm, but when our protagonist announced they were going to learn more about wind, the enthusiasm completely vanished. That was the most basic of the basics. Maxim had only gone there to observe, but he became so curious he just had to ask. He asked our protagonist if he was really going to teach only about wind. After gathering so many people, Oscar simply said yes and asked the elder to give a small demonstration. Simply by opening his palm, wind instantly filled the entire room. Our boy thanked him for his participation, then called on Amy, a blonde girl. He wanted her to show her wind as well. Completely embarrassed at being chosen, she did as she was asked. Her wind was very gentle and quite comforting. Oscar then asked if anyone could explain the difference between the two spells, besides the physical characteristics of the wind. The same female student, from the beginning of the chapter, spoke of the mana's temperament. Our protagonist said that Veronica's answer was correct. The same spell varied in the mana's temperament, and that is fascinating. Even though their creation process was identical, one was immensely powerful, while the other was soft and gentle. The contrast was so extreme, it was hard to believe they were both the same type of wind. Oscar then posed a question, asking if anyone could explain what mana temperament truly was. A student asked if he was referring to the 4 main types, which are actually the 4 fundamental systems. To truly grasp mana temperament, they needed to return to the core principles of the White Tower. Balance. He asked if anyone could explain why the white and blue towers symbolize this. A student confidently answered that it was because of the elements they commanded, which was spot on. Red and gold are undeniably strong and fast, but they're not harmonious. There's no such thing as cold fire, for instance. However, wind and water can be infinitely cold or searingly hot. That's precisely why they represent perfect balance. Yet, there's still a subtle difference between them. The conditions for heating water are remarkably simple. At atmospheric pressure, you just need to apply energy to it. However, heating air is an even simpler task, as it easily assimilates with its surroundings. As he explained this, some students felt a warm breeze, while others shivered from a cold one. Oscar declared that wind is the element possessing the greatest freedom. It can be strong like fire, fast like lightning, or free-flowing like water, depending entirely on the mage's imagination. This element can adopt any temperament, harmonizing perfectly with anything. Oscar then asked the class what kind of entity wind represented to them personally. Suddenly, in the middle of the lecture, Maxim seemed completely entranced by the lesson. Our protagonist immediately realized what was happening. He worriedly told the student beside the elder not to touch him. Oscar then told everyone not to disturb him. The elder was undergoing a profound process of enlightenment. What he was experiencing right now was his very own awakening. After some time, Maxim slowly opened his eyes again. Our protagonist immediately asked how he was doing. Unfortunately, Maxim hadn't quite managed to reach level 8. Even so, he joyfully embraced our protagonist. But Oscar interjected, stating that, since Maxim was the tenure professor, our boy was actually the one who should be thanking him. Thanks to this, our protagonist's future classes were about to get a whole lot easier, now that he'd earned Maxim's respect, right in front of all the mages. But the biggest win from all of this was definitely snagging Veronica's attention. She was one of the individuals the old Oscar had specifically made notes about. The very next day, he headed straight to the training room, because Veronica had called it an interesting place. But our protagonist absolutely had to figure out why she'd given him such a pitying look when she realized he knew nothing about that training room. Upon reaching the door, Oscar's suspicions began to mount. Only 3 out of 300 training rooms were designed like this. Maybe it really was special. Once inside, he started taking in the surroundings. The energy here felt incredibly different. An artificial intelligence immediately struck up a conversation with our boy, offering support for the training conducted in this very spot. Realizing this was magical engineering at its finest, Oscar instantly figured out that the Golden Tower was raking in serious cash. The AI then asked if he wanted to register for personalized training, but he refused, so it inquired what level he wished to attempt, informing him that there were 100 training programs. In total, Oscar decided to begin with the first stage. 3 glowing balls appeared before him. The boy needed to destroy them, using either magic or physical attacks. But before hearing any further instructions, our boy promptly popped all the balls, just to get a feel for the difficulty. Immediately, he decided to raise the level. Our protagonist then jumped straight to level 100. The artificial intelligence sternly warned that, from level 80 onwards, the test became genuinely dangerous, because the balls moved at extreme speeds. Oscar wasn't expecting the device to be so dramatic. While he was stretching, something whizzed right past his head. He needed to destroy 1,000 balls without using any long-range magic, and couldn't be hit more than 10 times. Knowing the rules, Oscar immediately began his attack. He quickly realized that at this insane pace, his mana would soon run out, so using as little as possible was his best bet. He began to attack with such tiny gusts of wind. They resembled razor-sharp needles. A large number of orbs were obliterated. Our hero's strategy seemed to be spot on, but he still needed to be careful with their attacks. If he were hit by even one of those, he'd certainly feel it later. Panting heavily, he was congratulated for completing the stage. Our boy acknowledged it was a great warm-up. This training is typically done by mages of this generation from an early age, signaling their superior preparedness. Oscar got back on his feet, deciding he needed to continue his training. But he ended up being surprised by a visitor. Veronica had gone there. She didn't think our protagonist would follow her advice, but he declared his personal philosophy: a healthy body comes before a healthy week. Oscar had just come to check out the facilities and wished her a good training session. But Veronica knew that saying came from the great Sage Oscar, not the Oscar she knew. The old Oscar used to look down on her a lot, even though they were both orphans. Veronica couldn't understand this sudden change in behavior. Speaking to the AI, she set the difficulty to level 50. She also asked if there had been any changes in the rankings, and the artificial intelligence said yes. To her surprise, an anonymous participant was in first place, having completed level 100 in less than 10 minutes. She asked who this person was, but for information security reasons, the machine couldn't reveal it. Veronica started to think an elder might have done it, but only level 5 mages could do rank training, since it was completed in under 10 minutes. That was the first record of its kind on the entire continent. She soon realized that the protagonist might have been responsible for this record. Back in the hallways, Oscar was thinking he'd be incredibly sore the next day. That's when he bumped into Maxim. The two exchanged friendly greetings. Maxim mentioned he had something to ask. Fidelina reported that merchants weren't buying potions from the White Tower. They must have heard about what happened with the Blue Tower. Our boy absolutely hated this commercial retaliation. To make matters worse, the breakfast line was absolutely massive, only fueling his frustration. Our protagonist then overheard a conversation between some other colleagues. Oscar quickly realized those two were Wind Knights, who worked as delivery men. Our protagonist swiftly understood that making deliveries wasn't exactly profitable. The only upside was the citizens' evaluation, and these Wind Knights were super motivated because hard work meant great rewards. This definitely caught our protagonist's attention. He decided to jump into their conversation, want to know if they frequently encountered people during their deliveries. They replied with a firm yes, because they needed to collect a signature from the person who ordered the item. Upon delivery, Oscar thanked them profusely for that crucial piece of information and sprinted out of the cafeteria. He raced to speak directly with Gandalf. His brilliant idea was to use the delivery service to make door-to-door sales Gandalf, however, didn't think this was very practical, since the potions made by the White Tower weren't exactly used in daily life. Our boy declared he could make brand new ones, and they wouldn't even need to innovate much. They already had a fantastic recovery potion right there. It could be adjusted to cater to specific groups, retargeting them as their primary market. This way, it would be possible to sell more products in a single sale and reach even more people. Oh, and they shouldn't even call it potion. A few days later, an old man was sitting in the town square, complaining loudly. He grumbled that he wasn't as energetic as he used to be. That's when an air knight introduced himself. He was there to deliver a letter from a distant friend. The two chatted briefly, and the old man lamented he wasn't the same anymore. His energy was seriously flagging, so the air knight suggested he try something new. This was the Magic Tower's latest and greatest creation, a truly potent and effective tonic. And that tonic's name? S0, which immediately piqued the old man's interest. It was specifically designed for the elderly, boosting their immune system and skyrocketing their energy. The salesman then asked if the old man knew the other, that elderly gentleman from the street below, the one who, that after just a dose of that very remedy, was now preparing to hike a whole mountain, even despite his long-standing knee problems. Confiding in him, the salesman revealed that the White Tower's prodigy, Oscar Krusian, was personally behind this tonic, since our boy's fame had already spread far and wide. The old man, intrigued, inquired about the medicine's price. He learned it cost a mere 30 coins, with a recommendation to take just one per week. But he still found the price a bit steep, and he'd been fooled by plenty of false advertisements before. However, the salesman insisted, undeterred, stating he would never deceive him like that, because the White Tower was a different league entirely. In fact, I have an intriguing proposal for you, because you see, something truly interesting is about to unfold in this city. And upon waking up the next day, he started to wonder if it was an effect of the tonic. Throughout the day, he simply couldn't stop thinking about it. He ended up meeting the other elderly folks in town, who, by the way, thought he had died, since he'd been missing for several days now. They were deep in a competitive game of chess. Our elderly man, surprisingly, was doing much better, as he could focus far more intently on the game. One of the old-timers asked if he'd been taking some kind of elixir, and another was incredibly eager to learn this secret. So the old-timer had no choice but to share with them that he had taken a tonic straight from the White Tower, and that the promise hadn't been misleading at all. Now, let's cut to our protagonist's room, where they're facing some very serious problems. Someone was showing our boy what had just hit the news, in the daily newspaper, no less. The Blue Tower was offering a massive 50% discount on all its potions. Our boy found this rather cute, but the girl who shared this news with him was absolutely terrified. It could completely wipe out all of the White Tower's profits. Oscar was certain these prices wouldn't last even 3 weeks. Even so, the situation remained incredibly dangerous. The girl was convinced that they would be entirely pushed out of the market. Faced with her bold proposals, Oscar rejected them all. He argued the Blue Tower merely wanted to pressure them, and using a pandemic to peddle medicine could be utterly disastrous for public opinion. Given these immense risks, our boy asked if their potion stock was currently full. The girl then informed him that if hundreds of vials were suddenly stolen, they wouldn't even notice the loss. For our protagonist, this news was absolutely excellent. He had a secret recipe from the Zero series of tonics, and they could sell the potions this way. This was much better than just keeping a stock that simply couldn't be used. His brilliant market strategy was a progressive discount. The more you buy, the less you pay. As for advertising, they would invest a little in the Information Guild to spread whispers about the M0 tonic. It would be interesting to say that it specifically helps with virility. The girl wasn't entirely sure if this wild strategy would work, but our protagonist simply told her to just watch. Just 3 short weeks later, something significant was brewing inside the Blue Tower. That utterly envious mage, who appeared at the story's very beginning, was looking incredibly smug. He was sure that this way, they'd finally be able to crush the White Tower. The department head must be absolutely thrilled. Just then, the department head abruptly approached him. asking if he had read the latest groundbreaking news. Full of overconfident enthusiasm, he said he hadn't yet. His irritatingly smug smile clearly agitated the department head, who promptly slapped him across the face with a newspaper, telling him he absolutely needed to read what had truly happened. The results were utterly disastrous. They had lost a massive amount of profit with their overly aggressive strategy. The White Tower's tonic industry was a colossal success. They sold an astonishing 10 million vials in just 1 month. The jealous man definitely wasn't expecting this shocking turn. The immense sales volume was massively boosted by door-to-door sales. An insightful interview with our clever protagonist even acknowledged the Blue Tower's indirect participation in it, which subtly showed them exactly how to make money. Things are getting seriously complicated for them now. Just glancing at the sales chart doesn't tell the whole story, especially with public opinion strongly on their side. Now, our jealous antagonist is about to get extremely busy. Even if he slaved away for free for the rest of his life, he still couldn't even begin to cover these losses. Meanwhile, on the continent's eastern side, news is spreading. A colossal creature is on the march. Sword-wielding warriors are desperately trying to contain it, but their entire offensive formation is being obliterated. The samurai are completely at a loss, their morale shattered. This creature is simply far too powerful for them to handle. Suddenly, a figure appears, and this mysterious individual seems to have been searching for the creature all along. It's time for it to return to its rightful home territory, and if it refuses to comply, it will be utterly pulverized into dust. A technique called Relentless Wind is unleashed directly at the creature, slicing it clean into several pieces. The mysterious woman remarks, "These types of events are occurring far too frequently." Based on her distinctive attire, the samurai realize she hails from the White Tower. The woman then proceeds to speak with Yang, who apologizes for her sudden appearance in such an abrupt manner. Finally, she removes her hood, revealing Sasha, the revered master of the White Tower, and our protagonist's loyal disciple from his past life. She immediately wants to know if the esteemed leader of the Nine Dragon sect has brought what she requested. He then presents her with the latest news from the Empire. A torrent of news regarding the White Tower is currently spreading. Sasha feels a pang of fear, worried the news isn't good, or that they've gone completely bankrupt in the past 2 months. But what she doesn't realize yet is that all the reports are incredibly promising. After a quick glance at the headline, she nearly has a heart attack. It's all so incredibly surreal. It feels as if it was crafted just to please her. Sasha hadn't even remotely imagined the delivery service would become such an integral part of it too. She didn't even begin it with that intention. Her original goal was something entirely different. Finally, she declares her departure, declaring that all payments were to be made to the Imperial account. In mere seconds, Sasha vanished in a thin air. While traveling, she began to wonder what could have possibly happened. Back at the White Tower, she knew she had to check in person. Meanwhile, back to our protagonist. The blonde girl stated, "He's definitely a mage." But Oscar didn't know why she said those words. The truth is, he had managed to shake the Blue Tower with just a simple interview. Tonic sales had increased significantly, all thanks to what he did. Other cities were also interested in the product, given its satisfactory performance. The girl contacted the military, but they aren't sure if they'll buy it or not. Since there are no more problems, she doesn't need to report anything to the protagonist. However, she was very impressed by everything that had transpired. What needs to be done now is a monthly report on sales performance. After handling this step, Oscar can focus on the tower's internal stability, like restoring ancient magic books. Even though the old Oscar from this life was a genius, it would be very strange to start announcing advanced magic theory. Our boy will like to use someone else's name for this, someone respected enough. It would be great if this person just fell from the sky. Down the halls of the White Tower, a mage walks, stretching his arms. Outside, he realized he hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. Maxim and Fidelina quickly greet this person. His name is Schwein, and he has been in seclusion for a long time, for 3 months. The poor guy did it for his own research. He's an expert in magic theory. He's overwhelmed because of the White Knight that year, and he still hasn't gotten any results. Fidelina knows it's been 7 years since this guy started his research, but he seems completely stuck, facing practical difficulties. Maxim suggested our protagonist as a research assistant, but Schwein immediately shot down the proposal, claiming his research was far too complex for a level 1 mage. That's when they casually dropped the bomb. Our boy was already at level 2. He was also taken aback by Fidelina's sudden change in attitude, as she was now fiercely defending someone she used to loathe. Only then was he brought up to speed on all the recent changes. In this very place, all the mages seemed much happier, as if they just won the magical lottery. And all of this was thanks to our protagonist, who was now truly exploring his full potential. After being fully updated, Schwein was utterly impressed with our boy's formidable abilities. And the other 2 elders? They simply couldn't stop showering him with endless praise, proclaiming that Oscar was truly, unequivocally phenomenal. Now that he was finally in the know, he decided he absolutely had to meet with him. But he wasn't getting his hopes up just yet. The problem was his research topic was incredibly complex, observing the same magical phenomenon from the roof. And from the first floors was completely, utterly different. To be more specific, what he desperately wanted to find was the restoration of what the wisest among the mages, even the great Oscar himself, once sought. Later, someone informed our protagonist about a sudden, unexpected evaluation. It was Professor Schwein, an expert in magic theory, and the recovery of long-lost magics, forgotten by time. And for his current research, he desperately needed help. This type of person was exactly what our protagonist had been dreaming of. Schwein apologized for putting the boy through such a rigorous test, even though he knew he desperately needed help. However, Oscar shrewdly acknowledged that it was plausible. He was genuinely looking for a capable assistant. Our protagonist secured the perfect alibi. No one would dare question the contribution of a level 2 mage, since the professor was the head of the research. The test was surprisingly easier than expected. Even a level 6 mage would have had the same opinion. This professor must truly be looking for someone who can help him spot basic, fundamental errors. His research must be nearing its final, critical stage. Schwein observes our protagonist with a palpable, growing interest. He never imagined he'd answer the test with such lightning speed. Unless, of course, he's thinking like a high-level mage, since he's already on the final page. Maybe he actually could be useful for the research. The only problem is, the very last questions are notoriously the toughest. Oscar quickly realized this was the very magic he had created in his past life. What's more, the material for this specific magic are still present in this location. Finally, our protagonist finished the test. Schwein praised the boy's efforts, but was a bit skeptical, since he answered the final question so rapidly. This initially disappointed him, but when he began reading the answer, he had to change his opinion immediately. All the answers so far are correct. Even a seasoned professor would struggle to answer with such precision. Visibly intrigued, Schwein asked our protagonist if he truly believed the answer to the last question was correct. Oscar confidently said yes. But then, the professor was particularly interested in the 4 mana values. Oscar had written down, our protagonist used the value of fluid mana, and asked if the professor didn't also think that way. It seemed he had delivered the exact solution. The professor had been searching for all this time. He asked the boy to use these values in a practical test right away. A short time later, Schwein was utterly amazed at their achievement. He declared he would make our protagonist a co-author on this thesis, instead of merely a research assistant. Oscar tried to refuse, as it would draw far too much attention. Schwein explained the last question was a legacy left by the previous generation, by the great Oscar himself. It's called Ouroboros. Our protagonist still doesn't know why this magic was recovered, much less why it took 7 years to do so. In this particular case, you only need to use mana once, creating an almost infinite amount of wind, an infinite source of mana. But in theory, to our protagonist, this is considered a failure. Humanity had conquered all the elements. Yet, one final frontier remained unconquered. The vast, boundless sky itself. The Blue Sky Project was designed to break through this barrier. It began during the war against the demons. A vessel was developed to gain a critical military advantage. Ouroboros was intended to be its power source, but the project was ultimately scrapped because the magic couldn't generate enough energy. Oscar, however, remained incredibly intrigued. He saw it as a formidable energy source, perfect for other applications. The professor eagerly shared the news with Sasha. Only then did our protagonist realize the truth. This powerful magic was being used for a mere delivery service. This discovery left our protagonist absolutely devastated. He dismissed this mediocre outcome. But for the professor, it was different. This was the crucial first step toward conquering the sky. The first in 7 years? Oscar questioned. He asked if they wanted to tackle the same challenge. The one from the past. He said yes. That magic would indeed be their engine. But that alone wasn't enough to move the vessel. The professor agreed, which is why they'd use other, unconventional things. These other things immediately piqued our protagonist's curiosity. In 23 years, so much had changed. He explained that now they possessed this magical engineering, something that could absolutely change the outcome from the past. During Oscar's great research endeavors, the Golden Tower also lent a hand and successfully produced magical engineering. Our protagonist realized he should have discovered this first, but tragically he had died. Using this magical engineering, it might finally be possible to bring that legendary vessel into existence. The professor's plan involved using a powerful battery, one that could constantly increase mana, a strong heart that would pump infinite power. Our protagonist then asked if the Golden Tower knew about this groundbreaking research, but the professor said no, because, apparently, the Golden Tower viewed the airship as a complete absurdity. They were investigating entirely different things. An iron horse that runs perpetually on land. They call it train. Knowing the true master of the Golden Tower, our protagonist realizes something important. He wouldn't gamble on something trivial, but it certainly won't shock him as much as his own airship did. Now he finally understands the true purpose behind that research. This delivery system is merely a cunning scheme to monopolize the skies. The professor confirms that he's absolutely right. Currently, goods are transported by ship and carriage, while trains will improve all of that. Once the airship arrives, there will be no comparison whatsoever. This could ignite a brand new era for all of humanity. Their grand goal is to unveil this monumental achievement during the White Night Festival. And this astonishing feat was only possible thanks to our protagonist's invaluable contributions. Oscar is now thoroughly impressed. It was a dream he had long since abandoned, but his disciple never forgot. Considering all this, it's time for him to continue helping as a true master. He tells the professor they should delve even deeper. They must create a groundbreaking prototype to be revealed that very night, a goal truly worthy of the White Tower itself. It will have a much greater, undeniable impact on everyone present, instead of remaining just a simple, abstract concept. Agreeing wholeheartedly with our protagonist, the professor decides to share some crucial materials with him, insisting they must be read completely. Oscar quickly realizes he doesn't recognize those complex forms. The professor explains, it's all related to the production of batteries. Our boy, eager as ever, asks if he can study that for a while. His professor readily agrees. That material is truly astonishing, and overcoming its challenges won't be easy. But our boy is already bursting with enthusiasm, eager to start researching immediately. But before they begin, the professor has something important to tell him. Oscar assures him he knows how to keep secrets, but the professor isn't talking about that. In fact, he'd like to apologize. This leaves our protagonist utterly surprised, wondering if he's been found out. The professor reveals that this endeavor is incredibly dangerous. When the Golden Tower inevitably finds out, they will do everything in their power to stop them, which could put both their lives at grave risk. This news brought a wave of relief to our protagonist, but the truth remains shrouded in secrecy. Schwein claimed the boy was oblivious to the true danger. Yet, our protagonist was keenly aware of every threat. He simply chose to cling to optimism. If fear were to dictate his every move, he'd be utterly paralyzed, unable to act. And that, above all, was his deepest fear. The professor was thoroughly impressed by his fierce determination. Once this groundbreaking research comes to fruition, The White Tower will reclaim its rightful former glory. It's a goal worth any conceivable risk. The professor found that insight incredibly sharp. A surge of optimism now filled him. He was also incredibly eager to begin collaborating with our protagonists. On their very first day working together, they were meticulously analyzing an equation's practical impacts. Despite the immense force generated within, they still needed to stabilize the vessel. For intense days flew by, and they had already made several crucial adjustments to their theory. Yet, safety was still a paramount concern. To ensure everything remained utterly reliable, Oscar suddenly remembered they'd skipped 2 meals already. Time to take a much-needed break and grab more coffee. However, with a sudden flicker, the lights died. It seemed another blackout had struck. They were becoming alarmingly frequent lately. Oscar suggested they should take a short rest. After 6 long days, he couldn't shake a certain thought. The professor only managed to finalize that research, thanks to the boys' invaluable help. But our protagonist believed Schwein would have eventually achieved the same outcome anyway. They had progressed at an astonishing pace these past few days. The vessel truly would become a tangible reality. Oscar swiftly changed the topic. To avoid getting overly sentimental, a soft chime suddenly echoed, signaling them. Oscar was summoned to the vice master's office. Schwein stated he would finish up the battery, reassuring his student not to worry about a thing. Gandalf brought up the recent troublesome power outages that have been plaguing them so frequently. Due to the sheer regularity of these occurrences, they urgently needed to clean the power plant. Our boy immediately offered to take on the task. Gandalf expressed immense gratitude. They hadn't been able to tackle it previously due to their severe staffing shortage. Our boy needs to take care of that slime problem, so something like this never happens again. He'll be tackling it with Veronica the very next day. This detail made our protagonist a little uneasy. Low-level mages are usually supposed to handle this kind of task in pairs, and she seems to be struggling quite a bit. Gandalf suggested our protagonist try to cheer her up, and he enthusiastically accepted this challenge. Understanding the old man wanted him to mentor her. The very next day, Veronica complained about our protagonist's tardiness, even though he'd arrived a good 5 minutes early. The carriage is now departing, making its way to their destination. Veronica mentioned they weren't heading to an auditorium. Oscar already knew that much. They're actually going to the power plant. What Veronica meant is that she's officially in charge of this mission, since she has far more field experience than he does. Oscar understood he shouldn't act like a teacher here. The two are traveling in complete silence. Oscar noticed she seemed incredibly tired. He asked if she hadn't been sleeping well lately. She told him to shut up so she could nap for a little longer. Our boy wants to know if she's worried about something, because he's racking his brain, thinking of ways to help her. If there's a clear path forward, it's always best to take it according to the notes. Veronica possesses an incredible talent. Now our protagonist wants to know why that was, stated so emphatically. He can't possibly miss this amazing opportunity. Our guy keeps trying to get through to this girl, but Veronica isn't sleeping well, and it's all because of our protagonist. She yearns for strong wind magic, just like Maxim, and because she can't, she's been training relentlessly. Accepting his interest, Veronica asked how he could possibly help. Oscar explained that if she's hit a roadblock in her personal development, it must be because of his last class on mana temperament. She reiterated she wants wind magic like Maxim's. But even though she's been training a lot, she hasn't gotten any results. Oscar declared the answer is obvious. That path simply isn't for her. Veronica immediately felt like she was being judged. He then asked if she knew what kind of wind our boy possessed. She believed his wind must be boring and arrogant. But Oscar insisted he had a gentle and pleasant wind, and that he was actually quite known for it. Veronica, however, had never heard anything like that, or at least that's how it was in the boy's past life. However, he didn't believe he possessed such a warm breeze anymore. While Veronica herself yearned for a powerful, scorching wind, mana temperament isn't something you just achieve. You can't just wish for it. You need to find one that truly suits you, one that truly resembles you. Veronica paused, mulling this over. If that logic even made sense, our protagonist's wind should definitely be boring and arrogant. Finally, they arrived at the power station. Our protagonist immediately spotted a few unsettling things. Several slimes were scattered all around the place. That's why the power outages had been so frequent, using her wind like a powerful press. Veronica began making quick work of the creatures. Our protagonist now truly understood exactly where her potential truly lay. Impressive acceleration and exceptional, blistering speed. Everything she did with lightning speed. She'd be even better if she knew a projectile spell, just like Majiro once could. Our boy's thoughts were soon threateningly interrupted. Veronica then quipped, "Am I going to be the only one working here?" Oscar seemed to have gotten the message. All the monsters were gathered at the entrance. This new information made our protagonist thoughtful, so he began to carefully analyze the space. Veronica told him to ignore one of the sides inside and to start working on the outside, but he revealed that something was very strange here. Just observe the creatures' movements. They're all heading for the entrance because they're actually fleeing. Veronica retorted that slimes had no intelligence, and our boy wisely replied, "That's why they obey their instincts. The strongest of which is, of course, survival." Now, the girl urgently wanted to know, were there any more threatening monsters inside? Oscar stated they'd have to check that for themselves. Inside, they stumbled upon something very curious. A massive cocoon was actively forming. It looked eerily like one belonging to a silk moth, since it devours mana. It's made its nest deep inside that place. And right at this very moment, it's undergoing metamorphosis, which explains the rapid drop in energy. Oscar now had both good news and bad news. During metamorphosis, the monster poses no danger. Maxim could easily handle it in 5 seconds. But when the moths hatch, they're driven by ravenous hunger and will feed on absolutely everything around them. And judging by the slime's palpable fear, this metamorphosis is nearly complete. They need to prepare for an intense fight. Oscar was already in position, but Veronica still couldn't quite believe it. The creature had only just hatched and was already ready to start feeding. Veronica, however, was terrified of insects, and running away wasn't an option either, as the monster could easily attack the nearby town. They had to resolve this situation right now. Facing the immediate danger, Veronica swallowed her fear and told our protagonist to get back. Oscar didn't expect that move, but he quickly decided to use a communication spell. The carriage should still be somewhere nearby, and they could call for magical reinforcements. Veronica was ready to unleash one of her spells to completely defeat the monstrous insect. She fired a wind press towards the moth. Next, she cast another powerful attack spell, so she could get even closer to the creature. But that didn't happen as planned. Oscar stopped her from getting too close to the enemy, and he used the wind to show her something critical. If she touched the creature's vile droppings, she would melt instantly. She almost died from that reckless attack. Oscar believed the monster left that opening on purpose, as it was a truly intelligent creature. Veronica then asked how he saw the dust, since it was barely visible to anyone else. The boy explained he focused mana into his eyes, which allowed him to see the particles in the air. She initially thought it was nonsense, but looking into the protagonist's eyes, she realized he was deadly serious. Now, they had to quickly defend themselves, as the monster was utterly enraged, as they hastily created a wind barrier. Oscar said he would teach her that technique later. The situation was spiraling out of control fast. Just blocking a single attack from this monster drained a whopping 70% of our protagonist's mana. On the bright side, though, that particular attack took 5 whole minutes to charge. Oscar declared they had just enough time to defeat the enemy. But then he saw Veronica clearly injured and unable to move her legs while blocking the attack. A fragment must have broken through their shield. Feeling utterly useless, Veronica urged our protagonist to run. Otherwise, they'd both surely die here. But our protagonist has a knack for knowing when people lie, and he knew the girl wasn't telling him the whole truth. The air around her was trembling violently with fear. Oscar gently touched her head, and the air immediately calmed. He told her she didn't need to be afraid, because he would never leave this place without her. Everything's going to be fine now. Mages from the White Tower never leave anyone behind. Knowing he only had 28% of his mana left, Oscar started to speed up his advance. He needed to end this fight in one decisive blow. Watching him bravely advance, Veronica was sure the boy was completely crazy. He should have taken a chance to escape while he could. Fortunately for them, our protagonist had brought a very interesting artifact along. the potent weapon he'd gotten from the mercenaries, which would be perfect for finishing off these pesky insects. The first shot was fired, and surely something had just died. But judging from our protagonist's expression, something had definitely gone terribly wrong. He soon felt a searing pain shoot through his body. The immense pressure from the impact had already dislocated one of his joints. To make matters worse, as the saying goes when it rains, it pours. The creature was already ready to attack again, this time firing its attack towards the ceiling. Oscar suddenly realized the creature had been planning its escape from the very beginning, but he couldn't let that happen. Unfortunately, he didn't have much mana left. There wasn't much he could do now. With sharp eyes, he managed to spot a silk thread shimmering in midair. Oscar did his absolute best to grab onto it. He actually managed to get his hands on the silk thread. Now he was being dragged away by the terrifying creature. Watching all this unfold, Veronica started to wonder why our boy had come up with such a reckless plan. Being dragged so violently, Oscar began to feel incredibly nauseous, eager to devour its victim. The monstrous moth's mouth was gaping wide, ready to start its gruesome feast. Just as he was about to be devoured, Oscar tasted victory. His magical artifact, capable of shooting powerful bullets, was finally ready to fire again. But for that to happen, he had to let go of the binding silk thread. He was just moments from being swallowed whole like a pill. At the very last second, Oscar managed to fire a shot directly at the creature's head. This was undeniable proof of his victory, because no living creature in this world could possibly survive. With a massive hole blown right through its forehead, the immediate danger was finally resolved. But our protagonist had completely run out of mana. In a complete free fall, it was time for Veronica to truly prove her worth. By saving our boy, she managed to create an air cushion, which expertly broke his rapid descent. As soon as they were reunited, Veronica looked incredibly worried, wondering if he was even still alive. Oscar remained unconscious, and the girl began to imagine the absolute worst had happened. But finally, our protagonist's eyes fluttered open, right after showing signs of life. He was brutally beaten by Veronica, who definitely didn't appreciate being scared half to death. Maxim finally arrived, looking incredibly concerned for his young students. The protagonist explained both his arms were dislocated. This completely shocked Veronica, as she'd been beating our boy, thinking he was perfectly fine. The very next day, an article about the incident was already out. Veronica brought the newspaper to our protagonist. The reporters had been quite generous, praising the protagonist's heroic deed, though he wasn't too impressed by that kind of empty praise. His friend said it could help raise donations, but our protagonist did it to protect his own. Veronica commented that our boy wasn't very ambitious. Finally, Frank showed up at the infirmary, looking incredibly worried. Our protagonist asked if his training. Isolation was finally over. Frank said the news hit him the moment he stepped out of isolation. He was utterly distraught, and Veronica just told him he stank. After that embarrassing moment with his friend, Oscar's keen eyes caught something intriguing. France's gaze seemed far deeper, much more resolute. He was undeniably a level 4 mage. But now, let's get back to the burning question. France then asked what Veronica was even doing there. When pressed about why they were so close, Veronica quickly retorted, "There's absolutely nothing going on between me and him." With a weary, deep sigh, she realized it was pointless to fret over mere rumors. So, she snapped her attention back to Oscar, demanding to know if he was the anonymous participant from a training room. Oscar had absolutely no clue what she was talking about, genuinely unable to recall ever seeing this. Veronica just waved him off, telling him to forget the question. Just then, Maxim arrived at the infirmary, only to find everyone already gathered. Gandalf wished to speak with the two young heroes, all thanks to France's exceptional training and Veronica's incredibly honorable actions. The boy was practically vibrating with excitement, yet Veronica remained perfectly calm, as always. As the two prepared to leave, Maxim asked Oscar how he was truly feeling. Seeing the boy was all right, he presented him with a small gift, a mysterious red box. It was the very core of the creature he'd just defeated. What's more, it had been officially decided that Oscar could also claim the valuable silk that was left behind. Oscar was genuinely worried about that, knowing it was worth thousands of coins. But the vice director had already given his full approval. Even Fidelina herself agreed with the decision. Oscar then asked if it had been offered to Veronica, but she flat out refused the reward, claiming she hadn't helped in the intense fight. Oscar then realized he had no choice but to accept the gift. Maxim wanted to know, would he consume it or sell it? Oscar made his choice. He would consume the item. The creature had only just finished its metamorphosis, so it didn't possess much mana itself, but the core it greatly aids in recovery. Oscar placed the item into his mouth, and instantly he began to feel changes throughout his body. And now, with incredible serenity, he began to absorb all that potent energy. Maxim imagined this must be the boy's first time absorbing mana from an elixir. Aside from that unfortunate incident, even so he was very skilled. Oscar finally opened his eyes again, and he thanked Maxim for supervising. Our boy had just reached level 3. He also felt healed, and his body was much stronger. It was time for him to rest. Looking out the infirmary window, Oscar realized he didn't feel tired at all. He decided to pick up that magical artifact. One more time, he thought it would be a good idea to create a spell to reduce the recoil from the shots. Meanwhile, a mysterious person appeared at the power plant. A mage from the White Tower was guarding the place. He went to identify this person, as they weren't supposed to be in that area. The man presented a special card. He was part of the Royal Investigation Team. The security mage quickly realized the man was important and asked why he had come to this place. His name is Nebula, and he was under direct orders to be there. It's not common for a moth like that to appear so close to the city. Now that he was allowed inside, Nebula would read the mana traces in the area. He immediately began his analysis. He noticed there were level 2 and level 4 mages. He asked if they were from the White Tower, and the guard confirmed they had come to deal with the slimes. The investigator was relieved to hear this. Finding the exact battle location, the guard mentioned that the moth had been incubating. Their Nebula could see where the cocoon was. He also learned that a mage from the White Tower had initiated the fight. The speed of the attack was impressive. Right after that, the girl was injured, probably in the leg now. He's focusing on the one who must have won the battle. He became very interested in the protagonist, who was able to move without leaving many mana traces. This is one of the cleanest scenes he's ever witnessed. These mages must be very talented. Nebula discovers a shell casing on the ground. A strange sight, especially for a mage's tool. What's more, this particular one had been modified. The mana footsteps abruptly halted at that very spot. However, noticing the gaping hole in the ceiling, he deduced the mage must have pursued the creature upward. Even for a level 4, this mage displayed exceptional bravery. His interest piqued even further. He inquired about the level 4 mage's identity. The guard revealed her name was Veronica. Hunting such a creature solo was undeniably impressive. But then, the guard clarified the investigator was mistaken. The one who actually defeated the moth was the level 2 mage, and his name is Oscar. And this revelation left the investigator utterly speechless. It made no sense whatsoever. He simply couldn't comprehend how a level 2 mage could leave behind such minimal traces. But after pondering our protagonist's last name, he realized it struck him as familiar. It didn't take long for a memory to surface. The infamous vaccine incident. This was quickly confirmed by the guard. Although our protagonist undeniably has his personality quirks, he is exceptionally competent and remarkably skilled. Nebula also swiftly identified the unusual ammunition. It originated from Trinity, that renowned mercenary's weapon. Still, it's quite astonishing that a level 2 mage was even capable of wielding it, considering its incredibly powerful recoil. Nebula surmised the protagonist's physical capabilities must be utterly exceptional. Clearly intrigued, he asked if the guard could divulge more details about our boy. Meanwhile, back to our protagonist. He's left wondering why all these books are in such disrepair. After all, he's currently in the White Tower's library, which should undoubtedly be in far better condition. It was once a truly renowned and prestigious place, housing countless rare and famous volumes. But those glorious days are now firmly in the past. Now it merely resembles an ordinary, neglected library. Oscar simply couldn't fathom that hundreds of years of profound tradition could have been so utterly lost like this. Now, a heavy guilt weighs on him for everything that transpired. He began to recall his final night alive. 20 years prior, he had meticulously planned to make copies of every single book within the entire library, and he is absolutely certain he assigned this critical task to Edna. But he hasn't been able to locate her since. Yet, it's impossible that she would break her sacred oath and simply vanish for 2 whole decades, especially given how methodical and dedicated she once was. Oscar was determined to find her. It was time to find advanced magic. With his potion progress well underway, Oscar anticipates having plenty of free time and seeks help from a woman. It's the librarian, and Oscar wants to know if she possesses any intel on dragons from the last 2 decades. The librarian said yes and asked the boy to follow her, believing the White Tower had managed to gather this information. The woman started pulling out some books, which made our boy quite worried because those books seemed to be just picture books. And when he was shown the copies, he realized they were just children's books. Growing more concerned, Oscar asked if the information was limited to books like those. The librarian said that if he wanted more, you should go to the capital's library. She mentioned there was a dragon who fought alongside humanity. Our boy asked if she was talking about Edna, and the librarian said yes. She was the great Oscar's companion. It seems she returned to her people. After everything that happened, there's been no news of her since the end of the war. But our protagonist is sure something is wrong, since Edna was very disappointed with her own people. After thinking about it for a bit, our protagonist realized he would need to find another way to locate her. The next day, Fidelina announced that all external tasks were completed. Maxim is emotional since just a few days ago they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Everyone is very happy. Gandalf said they need to prepare well so that days like these don't happen again. He also learned that the students are as loyal as ever. Gandalf would like to repay this loyalty, but they still need to recover the advanced magic lost over time. He wished he had learned more when he was younger. Adelina told him not to be so hard on himself. There are still ways for a person to learn advanced magic. Here's the catch. Only the Tower Master has full visibility. When Sasha took over, they only had 6 spells. 20 years ago, that number was much higher. A whopping 64 unique spells, to be exact. Gandalf then asked if Captain Chester was planning to return soon. Maxim replied that he had no intention of returning until he completed his final mission. If he were here, he could teach them more advanced magic. With that, they moved on to their next topic. Fidelina then shared that a terrifying mage killer had appeared in the northern region. Deeply concerned, she suggested implementing a curfew starting at 10 p.m. Maxim's face instantly dropped in worry because our protagonist had just left, heading to Baron. Extremely worried, Fidelina declared he needed to return immediately, but the boy had left at sunset and was surely far away by now. Gandalf swiftly ordered them to contact the Barna branch. Immediately, our boy must return as soon as he's found. Even with all his talent, he's still only a level 3 mage and needs protection. While they're panicking, our boy is busy admiring the big city. Just 30 years ago, this entire place was in ruins, but now it seemed to be run by flashy casino companies. Our boy is trying to find the right direction, completely unaware that he's being watched, until a mysterious person calls out to him, claiming he had been waiting. And this man, with a striking face tattoo, knows our protagonist's name. Our boy hesitantly confirms his identity. The tattooed man then reveals someone is looking for him. Oscar immediately suspects the Blue Tower, still seeking revenge. Analyzing the man's mana, he realizes this guy must be level 4. Our protagonist bravely asks, what would happen if he refused to go? The tattooed man chillingly replies he'd take him by force. That's when Oscar realizes he has no other choice. The fight immediately begins. Our boy quickly defends himself with a wind barrier, but it's shattered by a single powerful kick. Oscar is sent flying back, completely unprotected. The tattooed man is surprised Oscar managed to block the attack. Our hero is utterly stunned. A single kick shattered his shield, and without any mana, carelessness now, and he's done for. Oscar then spots a can lying innocent on the ground. He kicks it straight at the mysterious man's face, and BM, the can explodes, just enough to catch him off guard. And to make matters worse, the explosion was absolutely brutal. The mysterious man drops to the ground, handing our protagonist an opening. He lunges, grabbing him by the shirt. Our hero is now poised for a judo throw. He slams the man's body to the ground, like a sack of bricks. Right after the throw, Oscar creates some much-needed distance, realizing he'd held back too much. Rising from the rubble, the tattooed man concedes. Our hero is strong. They'll have to get serious now. Our protagonist mutters, this guy's arrogant. He can't even finish his thought, as his enemy is already charging at him. It's incredibly fast, almost like magical acceleration, and in fact it is. But Oscar didn't see him cast a thing. Oscar tries to defend himself with his hands, but the blow smashes right through his guard. Our hero's body is sent flying toward the nearest wall. He crashes to the ground, left breathless as his enemy closes in. That impact should have knocked him out cold, but our protagonist claims he's not even hurt. Furious, the tattooed man promises to end this with his next blow. Oscar is just waiting for his move. He might not be able to follow with his eyes, but he'll never forget how to feel the mana. This is his supreme martial technique, the first stage, and he's about to strike the enemy. The tattooed man starts to wonder, why did our hero just strike thin air? He must be crazy. But then, he feels the bitter pain of regret. Right in the middle of his chest, the poor guy is spitting up blood, and he's sent flying towards the nearest wall, landing strategically inside a trash can. The assassin is coughing hard, as Oscar warns him not to move, or his organs might explode. The assassin demands to know what that technique is. Our hero reveals it's all about resonance. That massive wind barrier generates a specific frequency, a frequency that vibrates in sync with the enemy's body. This vibration is then intensely amplified, directly assaulting their internal organs. It's like using a cannon to squash an ant. Still completely clueless, the assassin asks how our boy got so incredibly strong. Oscar finds the comment incredibly strange, as if they'd fought countless times before, and the assassin admits it's happened on several occasions, usually in the White Tower's training gym, to be precise. Our protagonist, still utterly intrigued, finally decides to ask who was even looking for him, and the assassin replies it was Gandalf himself. Now our protagonist begins to get seriously worried. It turns out that man isn't an assassin at all. He was actually sent to rescue him, because a real assassin is on the loose in the area. Oscar instantly regrets his actions and snaps that the man should have explained everything from the very start, and by all indications, he tried to talk, however. Our boy vividly remembers what he said. I'll take him by force. Only then does he truly realize this man is a complete idiot. Communication is definitely not his strong suit. And to make matters even worse, that unique way of speaking sounds incredibly familiar. Asking the young man's name, he learns he is Killian Rockwood, a proud warrior of the Forest Tribe. Now our protagonist is absolutely floored. He asks if the man knows someone named Raydan, and he proudly confirms, yes, that's my father, adding that he was a great companion of the legendary Oscar. Raydan was indeed from the Forest Tribe, a level 8 mage from the prestigious White Tower, excellent in martial arts, known far and wide as the White Lion, and a very close friend of our protagonist. But when he first arrived at the White Tower, he immediately showed his communication skills were horrendous. So now our protagonist has just thoroughly beaten up the son of a great friend. After helping him tend to his wounds, our boy is absolutely devastated. Killian, however, can't comprehend our protagonist's deep sadness. But Oscar insists he has very good reasons for it. The warrior declares the pain doesn't bother him. After all, he's a true forest warrior. However, he has a crucial mission to complete, but due to his injured body, he won't be able to fulfill it. Yet, he didn't say this to gain Oscar's pity. Our boy needs to help him out of this jam, because canceling means a massive fine awaits. This made our protagonist feel incredibly guilty, as he wouldn't want to harm the young man. Killian pointed in the direction of his mission. The voice of paradise. His task is to protect that woman. She's inside the Grand Baron Hotel. Our protagonist is knocking on a room door. He introduces himself as Killian from the White Tower. Marin's manager opened the door for him, noticing the boy was quite different from the rumors. Oscar figured it must be because he's wearing a suit. Marin asked if it was room service, but was told to get ready soon. Her protection detail had just arrived. The girl went to greet our protagonist, who was instantly enchanted by her. Oscar introduced himself to her as a level 4 mage from the White Tower and asked for some water. Marin thanked him for accepting the assignment, without many questions, and mentioned she'd heard his success rate was 80%. Our boy started to recall the information he had received from Killian. She's a very famous singer with an incredibly rare voice. Asking a more direct question, Maren wants to know if our boy is a responsible person. He said yes, and thought that Killian must be like his father, very loyal. The girl was relieved by this information, as she likes responsible people. Our protagonist found that comment very random. It was time for him to receive more details about the assignment. Our boy needs to prevent assassination attempts. Maren has been receiving several threats lately, warning her not to perform in that city. Oscar asked if they had any idea who was behind this. It's coming from a rival singer, who debuted 2 years before Maren. Oscar asked why they hadn't gone to the authorities yet. But things aren't that simple. The manager questioned if he knew what really happened to the mayor. Just a few months ago, Era Sweet, the ruthless competitor, is the only daughter of the city's next mayor, and the bureaucracy in this place is absolutely rotten to the core. Absolutely no one wants to offer them any help. Since city protection is completely out of the question, they're taking matters into their own hands now. Our protagonist quickly catches on. He's eager to find out what Era stands to gain if the show doesn't go on, especially since public opinion could turn against her. Maren then explained that her show is set to take place at the Baron Dome. Our protagonist asked what made the venue so special. The girl then revealed the venue can hold up to 100,000 people, and whoever gets to perform there earns the right to perform for the Emperor during the new year. One must pass countless rigorous tests to even be considered for a performance at this venue. It's truly one of the best in the entire city, and it could absolutely change Maren's entire life. Our boy asked how many people she had hired besides him, since he needed to form a proper strategy, and he was visibly stunned to discover that he was the only one, because no mercenary in that entire region wanted to take the job. Our boy immediately realized this task wouldn't be easy. He now had to protect a great many people. He asked her about the value of the cancellation fee, implying the contract should never have been made in the first place. But the girl's mood completely shifted in an instant, calling our protagonist an absolute jerk. She declared she absolutely would not cancel the show, as it had been her sole objective for the past 3 long years. Only then did our protagonist finally discover that he would receive a staggering 1 million coins for the job. Growing furious, Maren had genuinely believed she was talking to a responsible person. Tearing off her own wig, she exclaimed she was completely losing control. That's when our protagonist noticed something intriguing. Her ears were incredibly unique. That girl is a mermaid. This species is renowned for its beauty and possesses truly incredible voices. Despite typically having a fishtail, they can change their form at will, but they can't maintain it for very long. Maren then inquired if this was his very first time seeing a mermaid. Now, he finally understood. A bathtub was sitting right in the middle of the room. He thought they'd just die if they were kept from the ocean for too long. The manager then clarified that Maren was a hybrid. Oscar was genuinely impressed by this revelation, especially since mermaids are renowned for their beauty. It's common for them to arrange strategic marriages. The catch is, if they live too far from the ocean, they inevitably fall ill with a deep longing, dying early and abandoning their children, since hybrids are rarely accepted anywhere. Our protagonist now understood why the girl began singing so young, but he soon learned her parents are still alive and share a truly happy marriage. Oscar was happy to hear that, but he stands firm. His client could genuinely lose her life, and her audience would be in danger too. Maren insisted the people were safe, thanks to an artifact protecting the audience, and she's completely willing to take the risk, which only causes the manager more worry. However, this has been the single objective of her life. For the last 3 years, Oscar pressed her on why she was so focused. The girl revealed it all started 4 years ago, when her father was diagnosed with sorrow. The doctor had given him only 5 years to live, and now he has just 1 year left. An ancient calendar is said to be the cure for this disease. The girl must obtain it soon, which is exactly why she can't abandon the performance. If she performs for the Emperor, she can earn a single drop of this elixir. Our protagonist finally understood everything now. This is why the girl is so fiercely determined. Oscar is truly impressed by her and by the sheer influence parents can have on a person's life. Our boy never had parents himself, so he doesn't really understand how that works, having grown up on the streets. But if a father figure is anything like a master, doing everything to save him, that is something he deeply identifies with. Oscar then asked if he could see the stage now. It was time for them to get moving. Marin's got some final stage practices to nail down. Meanwhile, our boy is scrutinizing the audience's security. If everything doesn't meet his incredibly high standards, then Marin might just regret ever stepping on stage, even if it means risking her life. Oscar, however, decides to take a chance. Back at the villainess's opulent mansion, she realizes her rival still hasn't canceled the show. Now, only one shocking option remains. And honestly, it's not a bad one for her. But her trusty sycophant overheard a juicy rumor that Marin left the hotel earlier that day with a man. Era instantly suspects he might be Marin's secret lover. But nope, it turns out he's just a guard, especially since all her mercenaries were mysteriously blocked. She's absolutely fuming, wondering how her rival pulled this off. She orders her minion to dig up everything on this mysterious man. Back on stage, our boy is still observing every single detail, meticulously analyzing the entire venue's security. Once the audience's security checks out, our protagonist finally decides to proceed with the mission. Now, they can officially formalize their agreement. This, of course, absolutely delights the singer. Marin eagerly asks if he needs anything else from her, but our boy calmly reassures her. He's already seen everything he needed to. Feeling utterly joyful, Marin is finally ready to embrace her freedom. She's practically a whole new person now, a far cry from the furious woman she was just moments ago. Our boy is about to make sure that money was well spent, and he very quickly notices that the unsettling presence of two shady individuals. With incredible stealth, he unleashes his signature wind bullet on both of them. Now, their bodies are unceremoniously decorating the floor. Our boy strategically decides not to mention a single thing. He wouldn't want to make his new client nervous, after all. Era receives word that those two individuals were effortlessly defeated, and now they're nothing more than mere fertilizer. She realizes her rival actually hired someone incredibly competent. She desperately wants to know how her assassins were dispatched. There wasn't even the slightest sign of a struggle, but each body had a peculiar hole precisely in its forehead. Era is absolutely incandescent with rage at this information. She immediately orders her sycophant to prepare the car. She's determined to meet this enigmatic bodyguard. She already has a devious plan for exactly what to do with him. She intends to hire him right back at the hotel. Marin, meanwhile, assumes our protagonist. He'd never seen food quite like this. He's still reeling from her sudden personality flips. He warned them to proceed with caution. There was a hidden listening device in the room, but he'd already expertly dealt with it. Marin breathes a sigh of relief, believing no one could hear her now. Instantly, she snapped back to her usual self. She asked if our hero was enjoying the meal. He replied it was delicious, and he'd actually had it before, remembering he'd eaten plenty of it during the war. Marin was genuinely surprised by this revelation, as she'd always assumed the White Tower was impoverished. Marin thanked the waiter for the delicious food. Just then, a grating, unpleasant voice intruded upon the peaceful room. Era dramatically revealed herself to her rival, announcing she had paid for their entire meal. Marin demanded of the waiter, "Isn't this room private?" He explained the girl had approached him, acting like a friend, claiming she desperately needed to speak with Marin. He then awkwardly told them to enjoy their time. Our hero quickly realized this arrogant jerk that wielded significant power in the city. Marin urgently motioned for her companions to leave, but Era imperiously ordered the bodyguard to stay put. Erin quickly sensed her rival's true intentions. That was about to try and poach him from his job. And indeed, she got straight to the point, ordering him to break his contract and work for her, promising a payment 10 times his current rate. Marin vehemently insisted her bodyguard would never agree, but our hero calmly replied that 10 times the amount. That was certainly a very interesting offer. This sent a wave of panic through the singer. He then pointed out that since his current contract was for 1 million, that a 10 million fee was incredibly high. But the girl scoffed, saying it was perfectly fine. However, once the penalty fee was added, that she would have to pay a staggering total of 100 million. He provocatively asked if she could even afford that. Era initially believed he was just toying with her, but our protagonist declared this was entirely serious. This utterly enraged the jealous woman. She dramatically removed her glasses and demanded his name. Our boy confidently stated, "My name is Killian," storming out of the room. That she spat that she hoped to meet him again in the future, secretly thinking he was an amateur for revealing his true name. Our boy wished her the same, but when she stepped outside, she unveiled an expression of pure hatred. The jealous woman's sycophant asked if she was all right. She declared it was time to call in more assassins. But someone told her that wouldn't be necessary. This person's name is Wu Jin, and he's been tracking the target for a long time. Era wants to know how he managed to infiltrate the place. He said he received a key card from his employer. He also informed her that one of his brothers is en route. The plans have just changed. He thought he would have to eliminate the manager at the start of the show to destabilize Marie and stop her from singing. But he just found out he needs to eliminate someone else too, the singer's bodyguard, and the jealous rival demanded it be done painfully. The assassin will infiltrate the next day and prepare for the mission. Era wants to know all the details, and if the assassin needs anything. She is utterly furious, despising being slighted in her own city. Now, she'll make everyone pay for her bruised ego. Our protagonist heard everything thanks to his magic. He did it by placing a bit of mana on her while they were talking, but he surprised the assassin completely missed it. Standing up, he said it's time to return to the room. They need to rest, but Marin has questions for him. She wants to know why he considered accepting that proposal. Our boy asked if she thinks he took this contract for the money, and she said yes. He reminded her that she wants to save her father, and he would like to help her achieve that dream. In his past life, our boy didn't have that opportunity. One of his biggest regrets was not being able to save his master. Seeing the girl's dedication, he doesn't want her to carry any regrets. Marin was touched by these words, and she thanked our protagonist. Finally, the day of the show arrived. The production crew is working hard. A mysterious man is lurking inside the bathroom. It's the assassin, and he's poised to strike. He's fixated on a photo of our protagonist. The assassin has been holed up in that bathroom for an entire day. He's here to rendezvous with his ally. If the bounty weren't a whopping 5 million, he'd never even consider this job. He knows his accomplice will be wearing the organization's uniform. But as he's deep in thought, he suddenly spots something utterly absurd. Our protagonist washing his hands in that very same bathroom, and he's one of his targets. He starts wondering if he should just attack him now. He knows our hero is a White Tower mage, a martial arts expert and a level 4 mage, but it'd be much easier to attack with his partner. So he decides to stick to the original plan. As our protagonist prepares to leave the bathroom, he notices something. The man has calluses on his fingers, but not on his palms, a clear sign he uses hidden weapons. He coolly asks if the man's profession is an assassin. The assassin is stunned, utterly exposed. He immediately thinks about making a quick escape when a man doesn't answer right away. Our protagonist confirms his suspicions. He IS the assassin and decides to strike first. Unsure if escape is even an option, the assassin decides to launch his own attack. Our hero's mana-infused blow lands, gravely injuring the assassin. But even with one arm incapacitated, he still manages to corner our protagonist. Our hero can't possibly dodge this. Every single one of those hidden weapons is poisoned. Our protagonist collapses to the floor, completely paralyzed. The assassin believes his cunning plan has worked perfectly. He wasn't even that confident at first, but it seems he's just up against a novice. Now he just needs to finish the job. He aims a knife straight at our boy's throat. Except, he suddenly finds himself paralyzed too. An invisible barrier stops the knife dead in its tracks. That's when the assassin's chilling realization hits him. A powerful wind barrier surrounded our hero's body. None of those poison needles actually struck their mark. Our protagonist has managed to aim his revolver right at the stunned assassin. The assassin is utterly helpless. He can't even process how our protagonist could have defended himself like that. There's no way he'll be teaching that trick to anyone now, because his brains were just splattered all over the wall. Just 1 minute left until the show begins. And just like that, the lights went out. Marin appeared before the massive audience. Meanwhile, the other assassin is getting worried because his partner is incredibly late. Then, he started hearing footsteps. He naturally assumed it was his partner, who was already running quite late. But then he noticed he'd passed their meeting spot. That's a bad sign. As he opened the door, the assassin spoke to the person he believed was his partner. But instead, he found our protagonist. He was already on the hunt for this other intruder. The assassin quickly realized his brother's footsteps had been expertly copied. A basic trick, of course, for a protagonist. He then casually revealed that he'd already blown up the other assassin's head. This actually left the partner surprisingly relieved, because it meant there was no prolonged suffering. Our boy found the assassin's calmness a bit strange, but that kind of detached professionalism is part of the job. This was actually supposed to be their final task, as they'd just been recruited into a much more powerful organization. Knowing our boy is from the White Tower, the assassin believes our boy is nothing but mediocre, and he's ready to show what a true assassin can really do. He then unleashes his dark power, ready to end it all. This energy is pure poison, unlike the other assassin who relied on hidden weapons. Combining his dark energy with his deadly skills, the assassin creates a small, ominous black cloud. It's heading straight for the protagonist's back. Our boy was visibly surprised by this attack, but he quickly managed to dodge the first attack. If that touches him, he'll be instantly poisoned, a fact our protagonist had already keenly realized. However, that doesn't seem to faze him one bit. The assassin then asks if the boy is immune. Our boy replies that he coated his body with mana, effectively blocking all outside air. The assassin scoffs, thinking he'll suffocate, but our boy is actually producing oxygen inside the barrier. This is the true power level of the best magic tower, and the assassin clearly didn't realize that. His brother's defeat wasn't for nothing. This enemy is incredibly strong. Our boy analyzes everything with mana in his eyes, effortlessly dodging the approaching attack. The assassin can't even believe what just unfolded, and our protagonist is ready to blow his head off, too. But then, the shadow mana began to stir, completely, stopping the bullet that was meant to hit him. This left our protagonist utterly stunned. That poisonous energy completely melted the bullet. Now the assassin has managed to grab our boy, right by his clothes, and he's prepared to avenge his brother's death. The assassin managed to land a kick on our boy, sending him flying through the window, crashing to the ground like a massive sack of lead. From the sheer height of that impact, our boy must be seriously hurt. He's sprawled on the ground, and the assassin has already safely approached him. So far, the audience has no idea what's happening. That fall snapped one of our protagonist's arms, and the assassin believes it's all over, firing a few bullets at the enemy. Once again, they were stopped by the evil aura, which also melted the gun our boy was using, with the absolute upper hand. He believes this is our protagonist's final day. Just then, a loud noise distracted him. Turns out, fireworks are also part of the show. Our boy suddenly realized. His client remembered what she had been taught. Suddenly, a wind barrier formed around the assassin, and that turned out to be fatal. He's being severely affected by this technique, it seems. His body has suffered serious internal injuries. Our protagonist acknowledges this enemy was indeed incredibly skilled. He needed to combine the voices of thousands just to create that sound barrier. Even so, the enemy is still alive and tries to attack our boy, but his spatial orientation is compromised. Our protagonist seizes this opportunity to end things quickly, blasting a wind bullet right through the evildoer's chest, turning him into a big bag of fertilizer. Lying on the ground, our protagonist can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Just the day before, he had practiced a crucial plan with his client. If she heard 2 gunshots, she was to set off the fireworks and elicit a scream from the crowd. That's all our protagonist would need to succeed. And thankfully, everything worked out perfectly. Oscar watches the dazzling fireworks in the sky. Even as a newcomer in this line of work, he performed exceptionally well. 3 days later, Marin asked if our boy could truly leave. Given his condition, she'd even called a priest to heal him. But our protagonist insisted he was fine. She had found him near death, however, and was deeply worried about what might happen next. And now it's time to get paid. He received an additional $100,000. Out of pure gratitude, our boy said, the client's cooperation was absolutely crucial for the mission's success. She wants to know if he'll stay in the city, as the singer is leaving that very same day. She said he should be extremely cautious, as that jealous woman is incredibly spiteful. Now she wants to know if our protagonist won't tell her his real name. This made Oscar a little concerned. He even tried to cleverly change the subject, but she can clearly see his contact lenses. So if she knew, our protagonist wants to know why she didn't back out. Marin said she liked his expression when he talked about his father. It was like seeing herself in a mirror. So she decided to take that risk, even though it was quite reckless. Oscar said the girl is indeed careless, but he ended up revealing his name as Oscar, and the manager immediately realized he's the genius from the White Tower who made the vaccine. The singer immediately remembered seeing him in the newspaper too. She said he seems too normal to be a genius. Our boy replied that off stage. She doesn't look like a star either. Even so, when she's on stage, she's bigger than anyone else. Marin said our protagonist is incredibly good with words. She thanked him for everything he had done, saying he was the best bodyguard she'd ever had. The two celebrated with a handshake. In a hotel in that city, some guy has news to deliver. One good and one bad. The person there to receive the news is a woman. It's about those two prodigies who were supposed to join them. Neither is in the land of the living. The less talented brother is dead. That's the good news. The bad news is that the prodigy, younger brother, is also dead. This made the woman furious, and the person responsible was an acquaintance of hers. Killian Rockwood, that's what the rumors say. She was immediately surprised by this. Then he showed her a picture of our protagonist, but the woman didn't recognize the man, and it's impossible for his face to have changed that much, even if they haven't seen each other. Anyway, she wants to know who is impersonating her younger brother. Her name is Kaya Rockwood. Meanwhile, something is happening at the Sweet family's house. The family of that jealous woman. They learn that the Hoover family is hiring mercenaries, but the family leader doesn't care, even though that family is the former mayor's. He only held the position for 2 years and isn't that influential. They couldn't even protect their own leader. The man with the mustache reprimanded the butler for saying such a thing. He's after that family's classified information, and the deceased son is an easily manipulated idiot. In just 2 days, something grand will happen. Now the man with the mustache wants to know what happened to the boy who saddened his daughter. It's about Killian, a mage from the White Tower, and Marin the singer, but he won't mess with the girl anymore, since she has caught the Emperor's attention. As for the boy, he will be watched, and soon he'll be dealt with. Poor protagonist. He doesn't even know that the leader of the assassins and the man with the mustache, members of that corrupt family, are itching for revenge. Meanwhile, our boy is casually having coffee with Killian. After eating his fill, he's feeling much better. Killian sincerely thanks him for his invaluable help. He's also fully recovered from the brutal beating he received. As for the reward he's owed, he decides to leave it entirely in our protagonist's hands, since he did all the heavy lifting anyway. Killian then asks if our boy plans on returning to the White Tower right away. Oscar, however, wants to know if he'll be taken by force. Killian quickly assures him that he wouldn't dare. He's already reported to Gandalf that they needn't worry, as the boy is exceptionally skilled. Oscar, though, wants to go to the Blood Tower because there's someone specific he'd like to meet. He also tells Killian to keep an eye on himself, as he's now the target of a truly powerful person, all thanks to their last job. Killian quickly realizes he'll need to lay low for a while. His next task was worth a whopping $500,000 to obtain some heavily classified information. However, that money isn't worth the deadly risk he's now facing, since they both need to return to the White Tower. Our protagonist suggests they stick together for now. Killian finds this sudden friendly tone quite strange. Still, it would be good to be in his company, as he has some urgent business in that very city. He needs to capture the worst traitor in the history of the Forest Tribe. Rumor has it he's currently hiding in this city, which is precisely why Killian came here. But he can't reveal details to an outsider like him. Our boy hopes he manages to catch this elusive traitor. He then says they'll see each other again soon. At the White Tower, Killian asks how he knew the tribe's traditional greeting method, and our boy had to quickly make up a plausible story, realizing his old personality was truly terrible. But then, something truly surprising happens. Killian greets our boy in the exact same way. Walking through the bustling city streets that day, our protagonist acknowledges that going to the Blood Tower could indeed be dangerous. He's thinking that Edna is probably hiding, and even with the Blood Tower, which can find anyone, in Edna's case, it's a dragon trying to hide. Our boy suddenly senses the energy of someone above level 7, and he immediately identifies the source of this immense power. A powerful woman, and she's looking directly at him, leaving our boy utterly baffled. Her figure was obscured by the passing street traffic. When the street finally cleared, she had vanished. Oscar is now even more bewildered. The woman's companion remarked that she was being too kind. Just because the guy is her brother's friend? Since they were spotted together, he should be forced to pay for what he did to that new recruit. But she honestly couldn't care less. In fact, she'd like to congratulate our protagonist for getting rid of two utterly useless guys, since he's only a level 3 mage. There's something far more important right now. She then asked if her subordinate could even find her, even if she tried to completely erase her presence. He replied that he wouldn't be able to do something like that, so it would be utterly impossible for a mere level 3 mage to ever find her. Kaya is visibly uncomfortable, but she's certain she made eye contact with our boy, and he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. She asked for his name just one more time, this genius from the White Tower, and she found that truly amusing. She's eager to see what he'll accomplish in the future. Finally, our protagonist arrived where he needed to be, at the city's notorious Blood Tower. Inside the shop, the girl behind the counter asked what he wanted. Oscar stated he wanted to find someone. The girl then inquired if he'd brought any blood. Our boy confirmed he had, so she pointed him towards the next room. Finally, our boy stepped into the other room. Now, he needs to collect some of the rare blood. Even though it's just an artificial formula, he can replicate dragon's blood. He just needs to use a bit of his own powerful sorcery. It should be enough to finally locate her. It was time to place the blood into the mystical device. The woman then asked our protagonist to wait a moment. You have to state your objective and pay up front. Our boy didn't know about that crucial detail. In the past, he used to do this service without paying. Now, there are very specific search levels available. Our boy immediately asked for the most expensive one. He commented that the service used to be completely free. The girl quickly retorted that he was wrong. It was never, ever free. Oscar said he found out through the White Tower, from its former master, with a much darker tone. The girl asked if he belonged here, even though she hadn't even noticed his mage robes. Oscar claimed he didn't know who they were. A blatant lie. The girl then said she was relieved because they're forced to charge White Tower mages an extra 30% more. Apparently, their former master had used the service over 100 times without ever paying. This caused massive problems for the Blood Tower. The great Oscar was proving to be more trouble than she'd imagined. Apparently, he never truly grasped the extent of the loss he inflicted upon that establishment. If the royal family hadn't stepped in to cover the debt, the Blood Tower wouldn't even exist today. There used to be a free service privilege for all tower masters, but our protagonist exploited it to such an extent that the privilege was completely revoked. But Oscar then inquired about the service's cost and was told it would be a mere 1.5 million coins. A completely absurd amount for him, of course. He then asked if he could pay 100,000 now and the remaining 400,000 later. He could, but he wouldn't get a refund and would only receive the results once he paid in full. Now, he just needed to sign a contract. The results could be ready in 1 to 3 days. Our boy finally signed the piece of paper, still trying to process everything he'd just heard. Later, he went to find Killian, who opened his door looking rather worried, wondering what could have possibly brought our protagonist there. Our boy then expressed his interest in that 500,000 coin task. He's actually interested in it. Our protagonist is now at the Hoover family's house. It seems they're incredibly interested in that task, but since the requirements are quite high, it's been a challenge to find capable people. Killian then began explaining the intricate details. It all revolved around the city's former mayor, who desired to completely transform it, although it appears developed on the surface. Many people suffer from rampant gambling and addiction, and its institutions are utterly corrupt. But this kind of vicious cycle brings enormous money into the city, and the former mayor was determined to put an end to it. His fight against drugs was a resounding success. In 2 years, the illicit business dropped by 86%. But right after reaching that impressive mark, the mayor quite clearly lost his life. This whole situation is incredibly suspicious. It could be retaliation for his past actions. But so far, the truth remains a mystery. To find it, a crucial document must be deciphered. The former mayor himself cast the magic, and it holds a trove of vital information. A suspect might just be unearthed through it. Our protagonist's mind races. The Sweet family is somehow entangled, but it's the exact opposite. Mustache, the very head of the Sweet family, was a close, trusted friend of the former mayor, and actively championed the fight against drugs, which is why he's the current leading candidate. He's incredibly popular with the public, Oscar is completely taken aback. So that delinquent's dad is actually a good person? Suddenly, people are already approaching the room. A child then asks if they are the mages. From the White Tower, he's the family's eldest son. His name is Jake. Our protagonist introduces himself first. Killian does likewise, leaving the boy utterly impressed, especially as he's Marin's bodyguard. The boy is utterly impressed by that star, the one who famously executed notorious bandits. So he must be a truly incredible individual. He can barely hide his profound admiration. Killian, meanwhile, is clearly embarrassed, accepting credit that isn't rightfully his. Our protagonist wastes no time getting straight to the point regarding the vital information that needs accessing. Jake shares that his father told him that there's a ton of shocking information within, but he couldn't actually retrieve the data himself. Oscar then directly asks the boy if he thinks his own father's death is tied to all of this. He affirms yes, having only recently become certain. This detail in particular sparked our protagonist's interest even further. The boy explains that after his father's death, he reached out to many to decipher that information. But on their way to this very city, strange things started to happen. From horses throwing them to vehicles exploding. Not a single one made it to the city. And that's incredibly strange. Someone must be blocking them. Oscar wholeheartedly agrees it's very suspicious. The boy then adds, he needs to conduct a specific procedure on the mages. We see a scroll, clearly crafted by the Order of Earth. He figured the mages here would certainly know how to use it. Now, Oscar, however, immediately recognized it. It's a rare and utterly brutal contract. Whoever fails to fulfill their obligation, listen closely. They forfeit their very life. The employee absolutely cannot compromise this information, nor can they ever reveal it to anyone, unless, of course, they have Jake's express permission. It seems this firstborn is incredibly dedicated. Before signing, Oscar wants to confirm something crucial. He asked if everyone else present in the room had gone through this exact same procedure, and the boy confidently said yes. He'd invested heavily in security, so it absolutely shouldn't be a problem. But our protagonist, naturally, prefers to check personally. He demanded the others' packs be presented to him. One of the men immediately got agitated and worked up, looking down on a mere level 3 mage. And just like that, their bodies were completely paralyzed. Our boy cunningly manipulates the very wind around them, making those arrogant jerks believe they're feeling the presence of someone infinitely more powerful. The crushing pressure vanished, leaving them utterly impressed. Our boy then calmly repeated his request. Jake, understanding the clear message, quickly told his men not to get agitated. This whole situation was ringing alarm bells. He ordered the contracts to be brought forward. Our protagonist then began a meticulous, detailed analysis. He specifically called for Tun and Co. One of the men foolishly asked why he had been called, and he instantly ended up being violently thrown back by an unseen force of wind. Jake is now extremely worried, as they have absolutely no idea what just happened. Our boy then sharply asked who brought this pack. He declared that person should also be confined, because this so-called contract is nothing but a fake. It's just a normal, worthless piece of paper, with no divine power whatsoever flowing through it. He dramatically proved it by easily ripping the paper, which should never happen so effortlessly. These two must have already brazenly leaked crucial, important information after this shocking accusation. The bald guy impulsively prepared to attack our boy. But Killian isn't there just for mere decoration. He completely and utterly neutralized the bald guy's attack. Then he unceremoniously rubbed his bald head against the ground. The bald guy desperately claimed he knows absolutely nothing, but Killian demands to know exactly who he works for. Our protagonist firmly believes he already passed the intel to someone, and he absolutely needs to know who that person is. The bald guy only knows the exact number of mercenaries hired. Our protagonist is certain the culprit will soon emerge to collect the info and will probably strike with a massive number of troops. But it's far too early to throw in the towel. Oscar agreed to take $500,000 to decipher the information and another $500,000 to be hired as a mercenary. Alongside Killian, the boy absolutely loved this proposal, and he's already itching to finalize the contract. The materials are securely hidden away in a secret location. Our protagonist mentioned he has 1, 2, and the boy was instantly intrigued by that, meeting someone as cautious as himself. Finally, he unveiled the secret passage. It's the very first time he's done this for anyone else. revealing the case with the confidential materials inside. Oscar immediately began to analyze it, channeling mana directly into his eyes. He noticed multiple spells protecting the case, 3 in total. If it's forcibly opened, the case will instantly explode. Jake never imagined it would be so dangerous. He wants to know if our protagonist can actually do it. Oscar simply stated, "It'll be easy compared to what he did in the war. This is almost a hobby." The suitcase was finally opened, and the boy was absolutely stunned, as it happened incredibly fast. Now he could finally examine all this crucial information. Holding those papers, the boy began to feel emotional. He didn't find many clear clues, but there was undeniable proof of the politician's corruption. But in this city, that's just a normal day. It wasn't enough to get his father killed. Oscar is visibly impressed by the 10-year-old's maturity. He remembered that his disciple, Lloyd, had also matured remarkably quickly. He decided to help the boy scour for more clues. It was time to analyze that diary even more closely. Then, Oscar gestures to the diary on the table, asking the boy to read that very specific part. The boy then hesitantly asks if there's absolutely nothing written in the diary. Looking a bit confused and a little nervously, he says he'll definitely take a look, and he starts furiously flipping through the pages. The entry was dated June 10th, and it read, "Almost 2 years had passed since his mayoral inauguration. A flashback shows he'd transformed the city of Barron, once a notorious hotbed of vice. But on July 2nd, he noticed that even with numerous arrests, drugs were still rampant on the streets. He interrogated several street dealers, but they were all small-time players who knew absolutely nothing. Thoughtfully, the mayor decided it would be best to talk to his partner, Mark, about the escalating situation. But the conversation was incredibly strange, as it seemed Mark already knew absolutely everything. He had investigated up to that point. The boy stops reading, his face etched with fright, and the man asked what's wrong. Seeing his reaction, the man offered to read the diary, if it was too difficult for him. The next page, dated September 1st, shockingly revealed that Mark was a cartel executive, his hand shaking with barely contained anger. He saw the next entry was from the 18th. That day, the mayor had formulated a daring plan to finally take down the entire corrupt organization. The boy then panics, realizing September 18th was the very day the mayor tragically died. In a flashback, the boy remembers Mark, comforting him at his father's rainy graveside. As the rain poured down, he's utterly shocked to realize the man who comforted him was a cartel executive. Back in the present, the boy cries out desperately, utterly unable to believe Mark's heinous betrayal. Oscar declares they will make Mark pay. But the boy thinks it's utterly impossible in this corrupted city. But the other man comforts him, assuring him they'll absolutely make it happen, since they're from a powerful magic tower. Oscar explains the situation is far more serious than he first expected. The problem is that Mark could get tourist addicted and viciously spread the drugs throughout the entire country. Their only real weapon against him is this diary, and the looming question is when Mark will move to get it back. Oscar deduces he'll undoubtedly attack when the city citizens are completely distracted by something else. The other man asks if such a distracting event even exists, and the boy confirms, with a grim nod, that it absolutely does. He warns them about a massive party brewing right in the city center that very night. With that, the man suggests they evacuate Jake immediately and call for outside reinforcements without delay. Oscar, looking surprised, then jokes that his partner can actually make realistic judgments sometimes. But changing his tone, he quickly dismisses the idea and declares they won't back down now. Inspired, Jake bravely wipes away his tears and firmly declares he won't run from this fight. Jake says that if he runs now, he'll never get another chance to avenge his father. He then adds that if it's too dangerous, he can cancel their contract and fight alone. But Oscar is clearly a bit offended by this and assures him they would never abandon him. Killian reminds him that Jake trusted and hired them, leaving the boy deeply moved by their unwavering support. He then asks him to save the thanks for later and asks if there's a communicator anywhere in the house. Jake explains that external communication was totally cut off, as it was all part of Mark's insidious plan. With that, Killian asks about a crystal ball, and Jay confirms he has an antique one, just what's needed. Killian asks to see it immediately, and the boy reveals it was right there all along. Oscar jokes about the sheer convenience of the situation, but Killian tells him to quiet down and quickly snatches the object. Upon touching the ancient crystal ball, it starts to glow, thankfully showing it still worked. Oscar is utterly surprised and asks how he knows how to use such an ancient relic, and Killian simply says he learned out of pure boredom. It was an immense relief, as that was cutting-edge tech from decades ago. That miraculously still worked after using the ball. Oscar then asks if the message was successfully sent, and Killian confidently confirms it was. He just hopes the elders aren't too late to respond, leaving Oscar utterly bewildered by his words. With a confident smile, Killian simply says yes, and that they should arrive right on time. The scene abruptly changes to the Crystal Ball Management Department, a place filled with countless shelves inside. The department head yawns and stretches widely, looking incredibly bored with his mundane job. Then a young recruit, the only other team member, calls out to him with an inquisitive question. The boy asks what exactly they even do there, since he hasn't been properly trained yet. He grumbles that in 3 days on the job, his superior has done nothing but yawn. The chief then asks what he knows about their department. The rookie proudly replies, it's an honor. He explains their job is to diligently record and analyze the numbers flashing on the crystal ball. Long ago, before modern technology existed, this ball was what connected the entire world, ushering in an era of peace. People used portable versions to transmit unique numbers and thus find one another. The version they use is top tier and has no limit on the numbers sent. The chief then asks the rookie, having grown up in peacetime, if he's ever heard of codes. He reveals that these numbers could be combined to form sentences, a method secretly used in wars. This department is a state secret, closely connected to the imperial family, and only the elite know the code. But suddenly, the rookie panics and desperately calls for the department head. The chief thinks he's joking, but the boy warns that the crystal ball behind him is glowing. The crystal ball then starts to glow brightly. The chief panics, rushing to the desk. He starts frantically deciphering the code, which mentions Baron and the happy ending cartel. He then orders the rookie to swiftly write down the numbers, as he will handle the analysis himself. Together, they uncover the cartel's sinister plan to spread drugs and take over the city that very night. The boy is stunned by the gravity of the situation, and the chief yells to call national security now. The scene shifts to a dark forest, where we discover the security cameras have been completely turned off. The mercenary leader, Omar, announces they have 5 hours to retrieve some encrypted data, but another leader grows impatient with the wait and decides his group will act on its own. Right then, the mercenary, Jackson, also declares that his men will move independently. Frustrated, the leader kicks the ground, questioning the point of gathering so many different mercenaries. Here's the kicker. With 10 groups who've never teamed up before, the main hurdle is the leader's massive egos. Watching others jump into the fray, a subordinate gets visibly angry, but the chief simply states he'd anticipated this. He then explains that the contractor's daughter ponied up an extra reward, which is why they're all rushing. So, desperate not to be left behind, the leader finally commands his own squad to push forward. With a resolute step, their boots hit the ground. The full-scale invasion of the property finally begins. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream rips through the dead of night, leaving the mercenary leader utterly bewildered. One of his red-haired men lies on the ground, screaming in agony, his ankle completely mangled. That's when the leader realizes it's a cunning trap and bellows for everyone to watch the ground. But another mercenary frantically cuts him off, pointing, absolutely terrified, in a different direction. Stuttering with sheer terror, he warns that Jackson, the group's leader, was caught completely off guard and was already lying lifeless on the cold ground. Another agonizing scream echoes through the forest, and the leader snaps his head around, startled. Toward the sound, he spots his man with his leg mangled and blown off, and realizes these mines aren't triggered by footsteps. Then, several eerie magic circles erupt on the ground, revealing the mines are now activating all on their own. In sheer, utter desperation, the leader frantically orders everyone to bolt for the mansion. Desperate to escape the forest, the mercenaries flee in terror, screaming for help as absolute chaos erupts around them. Perched high atop a tree, a mysterious figure has been watching their every move. With eyes glowing crimson, Oscar leaps down at them, asking them, "Do you have a death wish?" In a blinding flash, he lunges forward and with a single swipe, cuts down several enemies at once. One of the trembling survivors ducks behind a tree, completely shocked to see his companions drop like flies. Shaking uncontrollably with raw fear, he silently begs for the monster to just vanish. Suddenly, the horrific sounds of the massacre fall silent, and only the wind whispers through the trees. Immensely relieved, the mercenary spits on the ground in defiance, believing the immediate danger has finally vanished. He cautiously peeks his head out, determined not to end up like his now-dead teammates. But out of nowhere, a single drop of liquid lands right on his nose, leaving him utterly confused. When he looks up, he sees Oscar staring down at him with an icy gaze, ready to deliver the final blow. In complete desperation, the mercenary screams in terror at the horrifying figure standing before him. Without a second thought, he raises his weapon and aims directly at the enemy's face. He then unloads the entire clip, screaming for the bastard to just die already. But the bullets simply ricochet off a magical barrier, and Oscar calmly states there's something he truly hates. The man is shocked that he didn't die, and Oscar explains it's the smell of gunpowder. He absolutely detests that smell in a sacred forest. And with that, the scene abruptly cuts to black. The image then shifts to Killian, who is now on the mansion's roof, looking utterly exhausted from the intense fight. It's explained that he used thermal vision magic, along with powerful wind bullets to shoot. He rubs his eyes, saying that although the technique is incredibly efficient, it consumes a staggering amount of mana. Still, he managed to neutralize 67 enemies. He then uses a scanning spell on the entire area. With a bird's eye view, he locates himself and the two allied mercenaries in the forest. The radar shows that the remaining 50 enemies were retreating and fleeing. At this, Killian wonders if the battle is finally over. But then, something strange suddenly happens. The two allied dots on the radar start moving at an incredibly high speed. He doesn't understand why the enemies would be running back to the mansion. After everything, Killian finds their speed odd, since they should be utterly exhausted, and feels that something is seriously wrong. Meanwhile, in the forest, Oscar notices the smell of gunpowder is gone, indicating the fight had finally ended. Just then, the two mercenaries come running and excitedly call out to him, looking incredibly relieved to find him there. They celebrate their victory, saying the four of them drove off 150 enemies. Their enemies were on their own, but Oscar quickly cuts their celebration short. With a serious look, he orders everyone away. He warns them to brace for a fight. The enemies are approaching again. The mercenaries charge forward, screaming wildly and unnaturally. Oscar thinks no one in their right mind that would come back. He strikes one of them, wondering if they're on something. But to his shock, the enemy bites his arm, dealt with completely unnatural strength. Without hesitation, he retaliates with a crushing blow, shattering the mercenary's head in the process. Seeing the others on the ground, he quickly begins to analyze the situation. And the way they fought, one of his allies realizes this technique is eerily similar to the one that was used on the tribe's chief. In a panic, another mercenary screams for help, warning something's wrong with them. Upon hearing this, Oscar's expression utterly changes, shocked by the revelation. In the darkness, red eyes glow and a familiar voice whispers, "It's been a long time." From the shadows, a woman emerges. Oscar immediately recognizes her as Kaya Rockwood, the traitor of the tribe. He confronts her, asking, "Is what they say about your betrayal true?" With a mocking smile, she listens to the accusation that she stole the king's tattoo. At this, he clenches his fist tightly, saying he needs to hear the truth from her own mouth. The scene shifts to a flashback, showing Kaya as once the strongest and most respected warrior. She was once an idol to him, but now her image is utterly distorted. He doesn't understand why she did it, or what she gained from betraying them all. It was because of her that the chief went mad and ended up being killed by his own warriors. Worst of all, he was betrayed by the very ones he loved most in life. Back in the present, Oscar begs her to deny everything and say it was all a misunderstanding. But she simply confirms it all without a shred of remorse, and even asks, "What's the big deal?" Absolutely shocked by her coldness. He is left speechless, asking, "Do you have any excuse?" A smile plays on her lips. She declares she has absolutely nothing to apologize for. An enraged Oscar screams that the chief, whom she drove mad, met a completely dishonorable end. With hatred boiling, his eyes glow a furious red. Ready for revenge, Oscar lunges into a fighting stance, asking Kaya if she truly wants to challenge him. She simply scoffs in response, but he retorts that a true forest warrior never retreats. With a firm gaze, he states he was taught to live as a warrior, not a sage. Kaya provokes him, asking if he'll be okay if he doesn't go help his friend, but he charges at her regardless, confident that Killian wouldn't lose to mere puppets. Far away, one of the allied mercenaries gasps in sheer terror. His partner already fallen to the ground. He looks back, utterly terrified by the dire situation, and starts screaming for help. His other companion is on the ground, surrounded and desperately begging for his life. In a moment of sheer desperation, he considers using his friend as bait to escape. But then he remembers his partner, showing him a picture of his son, promising a family trip. Pressured, he makes the wrong decision and starts running to save his own skin. He flees, screaming with guilt, abandoning his friend who's about to be captured. But then someone grabs him, and he regrets not acting like a true warrior. In the blink of an eye, a blinding white light explodes, throwing all the enemies away in an instant. The two mercenaries hide behind a tree, unsure how they possibly survived the attack. Just then, Killian appears before them and calmly asks if they're safe now. They complain about him being late, and Killian asks what kind of bizarre creatures those were. One of them explains that the enemies felt no pain and kept moving like relentless monsters. The other says all he knows is that Oscar called their leader Kaya Rockwood. Killian is surprised by the name, as he's heard of this person before. We learn that Kaya Rockwood, she's actually the daughter of the famous and incredibly powerful Raiden. Seeing the enemies swarming them again, a mercenary nervously asks Killian if he has a plan. He then deduces that this terrifying control is the effect of the legendary King's Tattoo. This sacred tattoo is only bestowed upon the strongest warrior, who will become the future chief. The artifact is so incredibly rare that it always returns to the forest temple when its user dies. The technique driving men mad is a skill known as morale boost. But originally, this skill from the King's Tattoo never worked in such a terrifying way. The theory was that at most, it could turn allies into mere fighting puppets. He's disgusted to see a sacred technique, meant for the most righteous, being twisted for evil. This raises a burning question in his mind. Why would Raiden's daughter do something like this? One of the mercenaries shouts for Oscar, yelling that the enemies just keep coming. But Killian tells them no, because he has a way to finish them all at once. He then starts gathering his immense mana, saying he'll need 30 crucial seconds, with a fierce blue aura igniting around him. Killian asks them to buy him that time to prepare. The mercenaries panic, thinking they can't possibly fight so many enemies alone. With little other choice, they start fighting with everything they've got. Screaming in desperation, one of them yells for Oscar, while Killian remains with his eyes firmly closed, completely focused and centered. The other one screams for him to hurry up, and at that very moment, his sharp blue eyes snap open. With his hands pressed together, he finally finishes, preparing his most powerful technique. The name of the spell is Solitary Garden, and it's designed to cover the entire area. Instantly, a giant dome of brilliant light forms, and he announces that the spell is finally ready. The mercenaries are utterly shocked, as all the enemies around them have simply stopped. With the spell complete, Killian separates his hands, successfully finishing the technique. Killian explains that he created a mana void space, effectively cutting the enemy's connection to their caster. The mercenaries are completely lost. He still didn't quite grasp what that truly implied. He then instructs them to return to the mansion, but one of them questions if he's not coming along. He confirms he won't be joining them just yet, as he still needs to bring a specific person back with him. Meanwhile, the fierce battle between Oscar and Kaya rages on, with explosions erupting all around them. She notes his mobility has significantly improved, and that he's corrected several of his previous fighting habits. Just then, Oscar charges an attack, enveloped in a crimson aura, concentrating all the energy into his hand. This raw energy transforms into deadly, sharp claws, ready to tear through anything in their path. With a swift, powerful move, he unleashes the devastating wolf-song technique on his enemy. The powerful blow sends her sprawling to the ground, and Oscar moves in, ready to end the fight once and for all. But to his utter surprise, she manages to catch the attack with her bare hand, and even praises his improvement. She criticizes him for being too honest, stating he needs to learn how to properly deceive an enemy. Suddenly, she realizes her control ability has been severed, and she can't understand why. Oscar claims he didn't turn anything off, and yells for her to get down because of Killian. Just then, a gigantic beam of light descends from the sky, hitting Kaya head-on with full, devastating force. Kaya is stunned by the unexpected attack, and wonders if that wind bullet came from the White Tower. She deduces it was the same person who severed her skill, but reinforcements couldn't have arrived this quickly. Besides her brother, she knew the only other tower mage in Baron was a level 3. At that moment, Oscar seizes her distraction and attacks, telling her not to lose focus on their fight. But she manages to block the blow with her arm, which cracks ominously from the force of his impact. Mockingly, she tells him he dreams too big, and wonders aloud where the sniper is. With a wicked, knowing smile, she says that since he's practically asking for it, she'll go find the sniper herself. She then unleashes a powerful magical scan across the entire forest, scanning for any sign of life. But to her utter shock, the search yields absolutely nothing, leaving her absolutely furious. While she's still reeling, Oscar charges again, and she can't fathom how he vanished from her radar. She refuses to believe a mere rookie could hide, or even shoot from such a distance. He lands another direct hit, and she thinks a low-tier mage has barely grasped the fundamentals. You have to be at least a mid-tier mage to begin to comprehend the true essence of mana. And a level 7 mage like her is essentially a world creator, a true god. This infuriates her, that a weak mage is deceiving her. A level 7, even though he's all beaten up, Oscar barks at the traitor to focus, because he was her true opponent. Kaya is astonished he hasn't collapsed yet after enduring that hit. Then she gathers a surge of energy in her hand and warns Killian to follow her path carefully, or perhaps not at all, and she attacks Oscar with a devastating blow. The impact is so strong he spits blood, feeling the enemy's overwhelming power. With Oscar on the ground, she swiftly turns and confirms the direction the shot came from. She dismisses the sniper as a level 3 boy and starts sprinting in his direction. From a distance, another shot rings out, and she sneers. His only mistake was not running away. The scene then shifts to Killian, who's hoping they'll finally wake up and act. But he knows it'll take her a while to get here. He's annoyed by the royal family's sluggishness, as they don't act with the necessary urgency. But at least this way, Kaya and Oscar were separated, giving him an opening to act. Suddenly, a flash of light catches his attention, and he turns, surprised by the bright light. Out of nowhere, Kaya appears in front of him, declaring her estimate was right after all. He's shocked she arrived in a single leap, and she explains her scan. Kaya reveals that he was perfectly mimicking the mana, the silent code of the surrounding trees. A mocking smile plastered on her face. She confronts the level 3 mage who dared deceive her. She casually floats right up to him and asks if they haven't met somewhere before. He says they'd only glimpsed each other from across the street, and she confirms their eyes did indeed meet. He then asks what on earth she's doing there, but she tells him he already knows exactly why. With a chilling smile, she warns him she won't back down, as she has her own crucial reasons for getting involved in the upcoming election. completely baffled. Killian asks why she's become Mark's sweet subordinate, a question that clearly takes her by surprise. But she laughs right in his face, saying she's a tattooer, and certainly not his subordinate in this matter. He's still completely lost, and asks what in the world these tattooers even are. She's shocked that he knows about the Purple Brigade, but remains oblivious to the tattooers. Killian remembers Oscar mentioning the brigade earlier, and that they were hired by someone incredibly powerful. Suddenly, Oscar arrives, urgently asking if he's okay, and Kaya is utterly surprised by his incredible speed. He warns Killian that she's a genuine monster, but they have no choice but to fight her. Killian agrees, remembering their promise, and asks him to buy them about 10 precious seconds. But Kaya interrupts their hushed conversation, casually asking how long they plan to keep whispering secrets. Oscar says 10 seconds won't be an easy feat, but he'll do his absolute best to get it. With that, he gets into a ready combat stance, bracing himself to face the enemy head-on. She casually thanks him for waiting, but Killian quickly says it's just basic etiquette when dealing with children. Kaya's smirk widens, saying she's curious to see what else he can do. Killian then narrows his focus, knowing that just 10 seconds won't be enough time. But since their opponent is a forest warrior, he hears Oscar suddenly shout his name. In that very moment, Oscar unleashes a powerful red aura, clearly preparing to fight with serious intent. Kaya is visibly surprised and asks if he's going so far as to activate his tattoo. He feels a great power pulsing through his body, unleashing a massive burst of energy that as his tattoo glows brightly. He declares this is all the power he can show for now. Fearlessly, Kaya calls him out, ready to challenge the forest warrior. She also prepares for battle, unleashing a crimson aura and getting into her stance. Their two powers clash, creating a furious tornado of energy that obliterates everything in their vicinity. The collision of their blows causes a massive explosion, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. In the middle of the smoke, she manages to block one of his attacks, but she definitely feels the pressure. But he was trapped in a magic circle, and she declares the fight just got fun. Kaya taunts him, urging him to surpass his limits. And Oscar screams in pain from the immense effort. With a deafening roar, he unleashes even more power, trying to shatter her magic barrier. Suddenly, Kaya's eyes widen in surprise at what just happened. From the sheer strain, Oscar collapses while still standing, and she comments that he pushes mana to the absolute limit. She finds this more annoying than she expected, because even if they're estranged, he's still family. Thinking Oscar is finished, she turns and says, it's time to face the so-called genius. But looking around, she sees no one and wonders where the boy vanished. From a distance, she spots Killian inside his own spell, and realizes he used the solitary garden. A strange sound rings out, and her expression changes completely, as she's caught totally by surprise. Just then, a dome of light forms around her, trapping the warrior inside. She questions if there's any spell a level 3 mage could possibly use against her. Then she understands it's a space that blocks both air and mana, making it incredibly dangerous. The sheer beauty of the technique impresses her, and she becomes curious to see what he will become. With a smile, she tells him he can feel it. Can't he? That his power isn't enough? She says he can't perfectly restrain her with just his current level of power. After all, even for a genius, their power gap is just way too massive. She tells him to give up on his pathetic delusions, because she's about to end this, right here, right now. Inside the barrier, Kaya is utterly stunned, and can't fathom why her tattoo won't activate. Killian admits a normal level 7 would totally overpower him, but she's a fierce forest warrior. As the former master of the White Tower, he knows every single secret about their tattoo magic. It's revealed that every tower master has access to this secret, ancient information. Their magic works by using the mana on their skin, so it can be controlled by simply removing that mana. He's incredibly relieved he read up on that, but he knows their real weapon is their martial arts. With a wicked, confident smirk on her face, Kaya declares the situation has gotten a bit complicated. She yells that this is incredibly dangerous. Then she lunges at the mage with absurd, blinding speed, His only goal was to restrict her movements. So he prepares his ultimate battle technique. He unleashes the Oscar style of martial arts, invoking the terrifying sound of the waves technique. Kaya is totally caught off guard by the image of water. She wonders if it's merely an illusion. With her magic completely disabled, she knows if she takes a direct hit, it's game over. At the very last second, she manages to dodge the attack with a quick, precise movement, but to everyone's absolute surprise, a shimmering golden barrier of light appears and blocks the attack. The image fades, and irritated by this turn of events, Killian lands a powerful, solid blow on her. He only needed to hold her for a mere second, maybe not even half a second, to win, but Kaya just laughs in his face, telling him he was merely looking at a fake image. With a victorious, knowing smile, she's surprised she managed to escape his blow. She wonders if she was just stalling for fun, or if she genuinely felt danger in that moment. Intrigued by the fight, she asks who he is, since not even masters entertain her this much. Logically, she says she should kill him now, but she wants to wait for his power to blossom. Calling him a toy, the villainess brazenly taunts him, but he has absolutely no energy left to respond. With no mana left, he regrets playing around, instead of fighting seriously from the very start. But all he truly needed was to buy some time. Then, a colossal black sword suddenly plummets from the sky. The woman is utterly bewildered, completely taken aback by the sudden arrival of this imposing black sword, and just then, a mysterious man dramatically leaps from the heavens, his silhouette starkly illuminated by the brilliant full moon. He lands with a powerful impact on the ground, instantly creating a shockwave with his intimidating presence. The man introduces himself as Walker, a superintendent from the Empire's national security. On the ground, Killian finally manages to gasp out her name. Kaya Rokwot. He ensures the reinforcements hear it, along with an arrest warrant. He informs her she's being arrested for murder and arson. Kaya immediately recognizes the man as the Emperor's Black Sword, a title of immense respect. Killian is utterly surprised that the Imperial family sent a level 7 knight to help them. Seeing all the soldiers gathered, she finds this entire situation incredibly dull and uninteresting. She figures that with the Empire now involved, it's simply no longer worth fighting here. So, she casually raises her hands in surrender. But Walker sternly warns that he won't let her escape. She boasts about her wisdom for retreating, but realizes he isn't listening to her at all. With a chilling smile, she warns him she won't forgive this, then bids farewell with a lingering, ominous threat. Just then, she activates a technique and vanishes in a sudden gust of wind, making a swift and clean escape. A soldier asks if they should pursue her, but Walker replies it's no use, she's too good. He then turns and orders his men to continue with the established siege. Then, he approaches the fallen Killian and asks what he was even thinking, attacking like that. But he quickly realizes the mage used up all his energy and completely passed out right there. With a hand on his shoulder, he remarks that the kid held up well until the very end. The scene changes and Killian suddenly wakes up in what appears to be a beautifully kept garden. He looks at his gem and with a confused mind, wonders if it was all just a dream. A man asks what Radon is staring at, and he replies that it's the family portrait. He proudly flaunts the photo, beaming, but his friend quickly points out that little Kaya that was actually crying in the picture. His friend questions why he didn't just remove his mask, but Raiden insists he must maintain his dignified facade. The man then jokes Raiden's face is far too handsome, and that Raiden wanted a more viral look for the photo. He then congratulates Raiden on the arrival of his second child, and Raiden suggests his friend join the tower. But Raiden then states quite firmly that he doesn't care if his children choose not to become mages. This revelation completely stuns his friend. He clarifies that a dream is a profoundly personal journey, and that his children will inherently grasp what true justice means. With a knowing smile, the man nods. He wholly agrees with the profound wisdom of his great friend. Even so, Raiden, his friend, presses on. I still ask you to send the children to the tower. Raiden simply replies he'll think about it. The tranquil scene then abruptly shifts to the present, with Killian's eyes slowly fluttering open, and him thinking it had all been a mere dream. He sits up in bed, mumbling apologies to Raiden, when he suddenly hears a strange noise in the room. Turning around, he spots Oscar meticulously peeling an apple, and immediately asks what in the world he's doing there. Oscar, taken aback by the sudden question, blinks and simply replies he was just peeling an apple to eat. Killian demands if he has to do it right in front of him, and Oscar claims it magically makes the fruit taste better. Killian then grudgingly thanks him for the apple and admits it was, in fact, truly delicious. He then inquires about how much time has actually passed, and Oscar gravely replies, it's been 3 long days. He realizes it was the very same priestess who healed him, and Oscar reassures him, don't worry, you'll be fine. Then, Oscar cryptically mentions that elder maxim gave him a truly brutal chewing out, making Killian immensely relieved he was unconscious for that. Oscar quickly changes the subject, warning him to be extremely careful, as there's a dangerous mage hunter operating in the north. Killian asks if anyone from their tower has been caught yet, especially since even level 5 mages are falling victim. Fortunately, no one from their ranks. Not yet, but his friend gravely warns him not to let his guard down, as other prominent towers have already suffered attacks. The ruthless hunter is now confirmed to be in their territory and exclusively preys on mages who are caught alone. So, he concludes, they'll undoubtedly be safer together. Oscar then solemnly confirms this vital information. He'll head back to the White Tower with him, now that he's found the traitor he was looking for. Killian is understandably worried about him, but Oscar quickly reassures him, saying that forest warriors bounce back incredibly fast. But the concern wasn't just about his physical recovery. It was about the fact he fought against his own family. Just then, Jake burst through the bedroom door, shouting out the names of the 2 heroes. The young boy dashes inside, incredibly relieved to see Oscar back on his feet. Oscar thanks him for calling the priest earlier. Jake then hands over a gift he personally prepared for when Killian finally woke up after the fight. It was their payment for a job well done. Jake apologizes, wishing he could offer more, but Killian assures him it's more than enough. The boy bows deeply in heartfelt gratitude, and Oscar jokingly reminds them that Mark was supposed to be the one paying. With a bright smile, Jake reveals his dream has changed. He no longer wants to be a politician, like his father. Killian beams with pride, suggesting he could be a fantastic mage if he tried. But the boy reveals he's going to join national security to punish evil and save the innocent. After he leaves, Walker comments with a serious look that the entire incident has been resolved. He explains that all the criminals have been arrested, including the mastermind, Mark Sweet, who is currently struggling. Walker stares at him coldly and states he is the executive behind the Happy Ending cartel. He then orders the guards to take him away, and we see that his daughter has also been apprehended. Desperate, Mark screams his daughter's name, Era, as he sees her being led away by the guards. He desperately begs them to release her, swearing up and down that the girl is completely innocent. But Era is absolutely furious and yells at her father for causing this whole mess. Mark is left completely shocked and speechless by his own daughter's harsh words. Back in the room, Killian asks if Era Sweet was also arrested, and Walker confirms it. He explains that she's heading to jail because she placed a bounty on their heads. Walker then turns his attention to Oscar. He then casually mentions Jake told him all about the crystal ball. Killian confirms it was indeed him who spilled the beans, but he immediately panics, wondering how he'll ever explain, especially about knowing the secret code. Walker declares his decision was absolutely incredible, leaving Killian flustered, a little sweaty, and very nervous. Then, he asks if the master of the magic tower is doing okay. This leaves Killian utterly bewildered and completely confused. With an awkward laugh, Killian is visibly relieved to see Walker actually thought his contact was the master herself. Walker then announces he really has to get going, glances down at his watch, and tells them both to take good care of themselves. Killian thanks him sincerely and bids him farewell, watching the man turn and head straight for the exit door. But before stepping out, he pauses for just a second, looking as if there's still something on his mind to say. He turns back, a thoughtful expression on his face, and asks, "Are all the mages from the White Tower?" Well, quite like Killian and Oscar, Killian, bewildered, immediately wants to know what he means by that. Walker only offers a thoughtful, lingering glance back, but then he simply brushes it off, telling the two to rest up. With that, he leaves the room, gently closing the door behind him. In his thoughts, he reflects that the mages he typically knows seem to care only about their own personal profit. However, the two individuals he just met from the White Tower appear to be strikingly different from all of them. He finally begins to grasp why the White Tower was considered so precious by the older generation. As he sees an image flash from the past, he slowly begins to understand, just a little, the true reason for such deep nostalgia.